A millionaire encounters two children at a park who look just like him. What he discovers about their identity changes everything he thought he knew. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. On a bright afternoon in late spring, Robert Harrison found himself strolling through Central Park in New York City with no particular destination in mind. At 45, he was a man who rarely allowed himself the luxury of aimless wandering. His days usually revolved around high-stakes real estate meetings, luxurious black cars, and the constant buzz of his phone. Yet that day, something compelled him to escape his office and breathe the open air. The sky shimmered a gentle blue, sunlight dappling through the leaves of the ancient oaks. Families picnicked on the grass, joggers circled the lake, and children chased each other across the playground. Robert slowed his steps as he noticed two children, a boy and a girl, both around 7 years old, laughing in the distance. He couldn't explain the jolt of recognition he felt when he saw their faces. The resemblance to his own features was uncanny. The boy, his hair the same chestnut brown that Robert remembered from old family photos, raced after a soccer ball with surprising speed. The girl giggled as she tried to snatch the ball away. Despite their playful energy, there was something in their eyes, in their smiles, that made Robert feel as if he were looking into a mirror of his younger self. Pausing by a nearby bench, he tried to appear casual while observing them more closely. Memories of his own childhood, less carefree than theirs, flickered in his mind. He recalled a father who was largely absent and a mother who, although loving, struggled to keep the household afloat. He could not remember the last time he had indulged in a moment of such childlike laughter himself. Indeed, Robert had been a serious boy and had grown into an even more serious man. Yet something about these children struck him with a pang of nostalgia. Perhaps that was why he stayed. Perhaps that was why, when the ball suddenly rolled toward his feet, he bent down and picked it up. "Thank you, sir." The boy took the ball from Robert with a toothy grin, pausing as though examining him. Meanwhile, the girl lingered shyly behind her brother. Robert's heart pounded. The sensation was extraordinary, as if a thread of invisible kinship bound them. "You're both quite good at soccer," Robert offered, attempting a friendly tone he was unaccustomed to using with children. "Mom said we should practice so we can try out for the school team," the boy declared proudly, before throwing an expectant glance at his sister. "That's right," the girl added in a timid voice. She clutched the side of her denim jacket, her gaze flicking between Robert and her brother. "She thinks sports will teach us teamwork." At that moment, their mother appeared, Grace McCarthy, a woman in her early 40s, with gentle features marked by faint lines of worry. She held a small paper bag in one hand, as though she had just bought them a snack from a nearby vendor. Catching sight of Robert returning the soccer ball, she offered a polite smile. For a split second, Robert thought he saw a flash of recognition cross her face too, but he dismissed it as a figment of his imagination. Still, he found his attention drawn to her. She had an air of resilience about her, a quiet strength that shone through soft eyes touched by sadness. Olivia, Grace called, her voice warm but carrying the authority of a mother who had faced challenges. "Don't wander too far," Robert murmured a quick goodbye before stepping away, his heart uncharacteristically unsteady. As he left, the children's laughter followed him, and in their voices he heard echoes of something he couldn't name. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was his business partner and old friend, Mark Peterson, reminding him of a meeting scheduled within the hour. The real world beckoned, but Robert couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just occurred. Back at his sleek office building on Fifth Avenue, Robert struggled to focus. The conference room's large windows showcased a panorama of the bustling city below. but his mind remained stuck on those children in the park. Had he ever encountered them before? Why had the shock of recognition been so strong? He tried to recall a possible connection. His past included a few unorthodox decisions. Back in college, when money was tight, he had donated to a sperm bank. But that was decades ago, a move he'd mostly forgotten once his career took off. Sitting through the meeting, Robert forced a calm demeanor, nodding as Mark explained the intricacies of a new development contract, yet his focus faltered. Snatches of memory filtered in, the tenuous years of building his real estate empire, the desperate times when he would do anything to stay afloat. And then there was Grace from his teenage years, his first love before life pulled them in opposite directions. Could it be? No, that was too implausible, he thought. By the time the meeting ended, Robert's mind whirled with possibilities. Perhaps it was a coincidence. Children often resemble any number of adults in small ways, and he might be overthinking a fleeting moment in the park. Yet the memory of those bright, familiar eyes lingered, fueling an inexplicable curiosity. In the corridor outside the conference room, Mark teased, "You seem distracted, Robert. Everything all right?" He forced a grin. "Just tired. Might need a little break." As Robert returned to his private office, a sanctuary of polished wood and immaculate design, he realized he couldn't rest until he at least understood who those children were. Though the notion felt surreal, a single question pounded in his head. What if they are mine? The morning after that peculiar encounter in Central Park, Robert awoke in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city. Sunlight filtered in through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating modern furnishings and the carefully curated artwork he'd collected over the years. Normally, he would savor his view, sip his imported coffee, and check the business headlines on his tablet. But this morning was different. As soon as his eyes opened, his thoughts turned to the children he had seen. An uneasy sensation flickered in his chest. He shrugged it off, attributing his disquiet to the demands of his career. Once dressed in his tailored suit, he stepped into his private elevator and descended to the underground garage. He had a packed day ahead, negotiations with a luxury resort chain, lunch with a prominent investor, then the usual sprawl of administrative tasks. Yet all he could think about was returning to Central Park, as if it had become a magnetic field pulling him back. By mid-afternoon, Robert found an excuse to leave his office. He told Linda Miller, his efficient 35-year-old assistant, that he needed fresh air. Linda, who had worked for him long enough to know his obsessive work habits, raised an eyebrow but nodded politely. Even Mark texted him, asking if everything was fine. Robert replied with a curt, "Just need a break." When Robert arrived at Central Park, he scanned the area where he had first spotted the children. The playground was filled with activity, toddlers squealing on swings, older kids forming small groups to play tag, but the pair of siblings who had captivated his mind was nowhere in sight. His heart sank, though he couldn't explain why he felt such disappointment. He hovered near a pretzel stand, eventually purchasing one just to occupy his restless hands. "Have you seen a boy and a girl around 7 years old, both with brown hair?" he asked the vendor, aware it was a nearly impossible question. The vendor shook his head, looking perplexed. Minutes stretched into an hour as Robert paced along the walkway, debating whether to leave. Suddenly, he glimpsed the two little figures dashing across the grass toward a woman, Grace. She was holding shopping bags, perhaps from a nearby grocery store, and wearing a simple, faded denim jacket. Her hair glinted in the afternoon light, and her face looked preoccupied. Once again, Robert felt that unexplainable pull. He approached them carefully, as if they were a fragile vision that might vanish at the slightest intrusion. "Hello," he ventured, trying not to sound too eager. The children recognized him at once, Oliver waving shyly while Olivia offered a small, polite smile. Grace, however, appeared cautious. "Hi, we saw you the other day." Her voice was soft, yet there was a certain reservation in her tone, as though she was unsure of his intentions. Robert cleared his throat. "Yes, I remember you and your kids from the park. They seem so fond of playing soccer." He managed a faint smile, attempting a casual conversation. Grace nodded, shifting her grocery bag. "They love it, even though it's sometimes tough for me to keep up." She sounded a bit apologetic, as if she worried about being judged. Oliver tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, can we go back to the playground for a bit?" Grace hesitated, then glanced at Robert. "I suppose that would be fine. I just need a moment to rest my feet." Seizing the chance, Robert offered, "Why don't you let me watch them for a few minutes while you sit? I promise I'm harmless." A wave of surprise immediately washed over his face. He couldn't believe he'd actually offered to supervise children he barely knew. To his relief, Grace gave a tentative nod. "All right, but I'll stay where I can see them." As the twins ran off, Robert and Grace took a seat on a nearby bench. He noticed the thin shadows under her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped as if carrying unseen burdens. "You look tired," he commented gently, worried that she might take offense. Grace exhaled, her tone colored by faint weariness. "I'm fine. Just balancing a lot right now. Bills, the kids' school projects, and other things." He wanted to ask more, but something told him to tread carefully. Their eyes met, and he felt a flicker of familiarity, memories of a high school corridor, perhaps, or a slow dance at some long-ago prom. Yet the recall was too faint to grasp fully. Without warning, Oliver called from the playground, "Mom, look what I can do!" He bounced the soccer ball off his knee twice before losing control, sending it bounding across the grass. Olivia clapped for him, her laugh ringing bright. Grace's guard momentarily slipped, replaced by a fond smile. "Those two are my whole world," she admitted. Then her expression grew solemn again. "But sometimes, I wonder if I'm enough on my own." Robert's chest tightened. She was a single mother, clearly juggling financial difficulties. Instinctively, he felt compelled to help. Yet he knew meddling in a stranger's life would be odd, especially a mother fiercely protective of her children. He glanced toward Oliver and Olivia, then back at Grace. "Well, if you ever need someone to pass the soccer ball with them, I'm around," he said, attempting a light-hearted tone. Inside, his mind churned with questions he dared not voice. "Thank you," Grace whispered, her gaze returning to her children. For a brief moment, their surroundings blurred, and Robert realized the tension in his own life. Board meetings, negotiations, faded into the background. All that seemed to matter was the laughter of two children and the quiet presence of a woman whose past might be more entwined with his own than either of them imagined. Over the following days, Robert tried to maintain his usual routine, yet the memory of Grace and her children kept intruding on his thoughts. His attempts to dismiss the resemblance as coincidence faltered. Something, deep down, told him there was more at play. But each time he entertained the possibility, his stomach churned with apprehension. At the office, he immersed himself in a critical meeting regarding a luxury housing project on Long Island. Architects displayed digital renderings on a massive screen, while Mark Peterson emphasized the importance of finalizing deals before the year-end. Surrounded by talk of property valuations and zoning permits, Robert struggled to follow the technical details. When Linda Miller appeared by his side with a stack of documents, he realized he had just missed an entire segment of the presentation. She whispered, "Everything okay? You're not yourself lately." He forced a vague smile. "I'm fine, let's move on." But as soon as the meeting wrapped, he retreated to his corner office and sank into the leather chair. Shutting his eyes, he replayed the scene in the park, the joy on Oliver's face, Olivia's quiet smile, Grace's wary gaze. He knew he had to confront the notion that these children might indeed be biologically his. Years ago, in his early 20s, strapped for money, he had taken what he saw then as a practical step, donating to a sperm bank. A memory of entering that clinical room, filling out forms, receiving compensation, it all flooded back. He had never expected that choice to have real consequences. A knock on the door shattered his reverie. Mark entered, eyebrows furrowed with concern. "Robert, I can't help noticing you're off. Whatever's going on, I need you to focus. The board is counting on your final approval for this next phase." Robert cleared his throat, trying to mask his turmoil. "I'm just under the weather. I'll be fine." Mark didn't look convinced, but he left without further argument. The moment he was alone, Robert reached for his phone. He dialed a contact he hadn't used in years, a private investigator he had once hired for a business dispute. If there was any way to confirm or disprove this suspicion, it lay in gathering facts. Later that afternoon, Robert waited in a quiet cafe on the Upper West Side. The investigator, a discreet man named Bradley Green, took a seat across from him. Robert explained in carefully chosen words that he had met someone from his past, and needed to verify certain details about her current life and her children. Bradley nodded, expression neutral. "This sort of inquiry isn't new to me, but it won't be cheap, and it may stir up questions if someone notices I'm looking into medical records." "I'm aware. Money isn't an issue," Robert replied tersely, though guilt gnawed at him. He didn't want to spy on Grace. He simply had to know the truth. Bradley slipped a small notebook from his pocket. "I'll need every detail you have. Names, approximate dates, anything that could help me cross-reference data. If you know the child's birth date or approximate time frame, that would be especially useful." Robert hesitated, then provided what little he knew: Grace's full name, the children's approximate ages, and his own recollection of the year he made his donation. Bradley jotted it all down. "I'll get back to you soon," he promised before heading out, leaving Robert alone with a potent sense of unease. In the following hours, Robert realized how deeply entangled he already felt. He worried that if the children truly were his, he had some responsibility to them, yet he also feared what Grace might think if she discovered his methods. This internal conflict weighed heavily, fueling a restlessness that manifested as sleepless nights and anxious pacing. That week, he returned to Central Park twice more, hoping to catch another glimpse of Grace and the twins. He felt oddly drawn to them, as though some invisible thread were tugging at his conscience. Each day he searched among the crowds, scanning for Oliver's wide grin or Olivia's gentle demeanor. But they never appeared. Meanwhile, Linda and Mark grew increasingly concerned about Robert's erratic behavior. A major investor nearly backed out of a deal because Robert missed an important video conference, yet even their admonitions didn't shake his determination. Something told him that this was not just a passing fancy, it was a seismic shift in his life. He needed to uncover the truth. Still, hesitation lingered in every breath. He recalled how Grace's eyes had flickered with a certain distant pain when she spoke of parenting the twins. What right did he have to disturb her life with revelations that could upend everything she had built? Could he truly step away if it turned out he was indeed the father? The questions piled up, overshadowing all else. As evening fell, he sat alone in his apartment, gazing out at the kaleidoscope of city lights. Unused to facing emotional dilemmas, he felt a mixture of guilt, fear, and a strange longing. For the first time in years, Robert Harrison, the formidable businessman, realized that his carefully orchestrated world might not be as unshakable as he had once believed. In the days that followed, pressures from every angle converged on Robert. His board of directors demanded that he refocus on a major construction deal, hinting that investors were wary of any sign of instability. At the same time, the city press began tailing him, curious about rumors of a new mystery woman in his life. Robert had always maintained a polished public image, so any deviation from his usual routine caught their attention. In his office, the phone calls were relentless, some from business contacts, some from acquaintances who had read speculative gossip online. Even Monica Park, his attorney, left messages advising caution. "I've heard whispers in legal circles," one of her voicemails cautioned. "Whatever you're getting involved in, be sure it doesn't compromise your reputation." Behind closed doors, Robert wrestled with an internal battle. The sense that his private investigation into Grace was unethical unnerved him, yet he felt powerless to stop. He needed certainty. His plan to approach Grace directly and ask outright if the twins were his was thwarted by fear of rejection, fear of turning her world upside down, and fear of his own inadequacy in handling the truth. In a rare moment of solace, he visited Eleanor Richmond, his 70-year-old godmother who had played a pivotal role in raising him. She lived in a brownstone on the quieter edge of the city, surrounded by potted plants on a terrace that overlooked a community garden. The interior brimmed with the comforting sense of old books and homemade tea. Eleanor greeted him with a warm hug. "You look troubled, my dear. Come, sit." She escorted him to a cushioned armchair in her cozy living room. Robert spent the next half hour recounting the swirl of confusion he was experiencing, the children's uncanny resemblance, the possibility of a sperm bank donation, Grace's reappearance. He confessed everything except the part about hiring a private investigator, feeling that was too shameful to share. Eleanor listened with unwavering attention, her wise, clear eyes locked onto Robert's as she poured chamomile tea. "You've never truly resolved what happened with Grace back in high school, have you?" she observed softly. "What you described sounds like a twist of fate, and perhaps a chance to make amends, if that's indeed your path." Robert sighed, gripping his teacup. "But how can I face her? What if those children really are mine? How do I even begin to explain that I abandoned her, in a sense, long ago?" Eleanor placed a hand on his arm. "Sometimes the world gives us opportunities to right the wrongs or fill the gaps from our past. You might be afraid, but that doesn't mean you can ignore it." Her words lingered in his mind as he left her home. That evening, a wave of determination washed over him. Despite the complexity, he decided he needed to see Grace again. He would find a way to approach her with honesty, or at least the closest thing to honesty he could manage under the circumstances. The next afternoon, Robert asked Linda to shift his meetings so he could head to Central Park. She looked puzzled but complied. This time, the park was bustling with weekend crowds, families picnicking, couples strolling hand in hand, dogs chasing frisbees. Robert scanned the scene until, at last, he spotted Grace and the twins near a pond, feeding ducks with small pieces of bread. Taking a breath, he walked up to them. Grace turned, surprise flickering in her dark eyes. "Oh, hello again," she said, her tone a mix of politeness and uncertainty. Robert could barely contain the swirl of nerves in his stomach. "Good to see you. Mind if I join?" He gestured toward the pond, and Grace hesitated briefly before nodding. Oliver held out a piece of bread, beckoning Robert to help toss it into the water. "The ducks really like the crust," the boy said, eyes gleaming with simple joy. As the children giggled at the waddling birds, Robert turned to Grace. "I know we don't really know each other well," he started, choosing his words carefully, "but it seems we keep crossing paths. I'd like to invite you and the kids to the Museum of Natural History sometime. My company helps sponsor certain exhibits, and I could get you in for free." Grace lowered her gaze, as though weighing the offer. "That's very kind, but I'm not sure. I just think it could be fun," he interrupted, then caught himself, his cheeks heated slightly. "Apologies. I don't mean to rush. I realize it's out of the blue." Oliver turned around at that moment, eyes shining. "Mom, can we? I love dinosaurs," Olivia chimed in, nodding, "and I like the exhibits with all the pretty gemstones." Grace surveyed their excited faces, her features softening. She turned back to Robert. "All right, perhaps we can find a day that works. I can't promise we'll stay long, but we'll go." Their conversation wound on in that gentle, tentative manner. Robert did his best to be respectful, careful not to pry into her personal life, though curiosity burned within him. For her part, Grace appeared guarded, but there was a trace of genuine gratitude in her voice whenever he showed kindness toward the twins. Afterwards, as Robert headed home, he felt a cautious hope bloom in his chest. Yes, the pressure from his business would continue. Yes, the media would keep an eye on his every move. And yes, the risk of heartbreak or scandal was immense. But somehow, meeting Grace and the children on common ground, an invitation to share an enriching experience, felt like a step forward, a step toward the truth, even if he still lacked the courage to face it head-on. Days later, Robert organized a private tour at the Museum of Natural History, ensuring that Grace and her children would have a special, unhurried experience. While he told himself it was merely an opportunity to spend time with them in a neutral setting, deep down he recognized that each passing moment made him more attached, yet a heavy weight of indecision clung to him. On the agreed-upon morning, the air was crisp with the promise of early summer. Robert stood at the museum's grand entrance, feeling unexpectedly nervous. When Grace arrived with the twins, she offered a polite smile that hinted at her lingering uncertainty. Oliver's eyes widened at the towering fossil displayed in the lobby, while Olivia stood in quiet awe, absorbing every detail around her. A museum guide led them through various exhibits, starting with a collection of sparkling geodes and gemstones that caught Olivia's fascination. Robert knelt beside her to point out the text on a plaque describing how each stone was formed. She listened raptly, her small hand clutching the museum brochure. Meanwhile, Oliver dashed ahead to a towering Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton, shouting back about how huge the dinosaur's skull was. Robert found himself grinning at the boy's excitement, remembering how he too once had a fascination with fossils. He couldn't help but notice that Grace stood slightly apart, watching them with a contemplative expression. Eventually, they reached a quieter section of the museum, a dimly lit hall dedicated to oceanic creatures. As the children stood before a massive whale replica, Grace and Robert lingered a few steps behind. The only sound was the gentle hum of distant chatter. "Thank you for arranging this," she said softly, glancing at him with guarded gratitude. "It's not often we get to enjoy something like this without worrying about ticket prices." Robert pressed his lips together. "It's truly my pleasure," he replied. "I know life can get complicated, especially—" He hesitated, carefully selecting his next words, "especially for a single parent." Grace's shoulders tensed. "Yes, well, I work part-time at a local community center, doing administrative tasks. It's not glamorous, but it pays some bills." She paused, her gaze drifting to the twins. "I lost my husband 2 years ago. It's been difficult." A pang of empathy coursed through him. He wanted to ask how she was coping, if she had someone to lean on, but decided not to push. Instead, he acknowledged her loss with a quiet nod. "I'm sorry you went through that." She offered a half-smile, revealing traces of the woman she might have been before sorrow took hold. "Thank you." Oliver's voice echoed down the corridor. "Mom, Mr. Harrison, come see this giant squid." The moment passed, replaced by the children's excitement. Grace moved forward, and Robert followed, aware that each step only deepened his resolve to discover the truth. He recalled Bradley Green, the investigator who had texted him just that morning with a request to meet soon. Perhaps the answers were closer than ever. Later, they took a break at the museum cafe. Oliver and Olivia feasted on sandwiches while Robert and Grace sipped lukewarm coffee. The children recounted their favorite exhibits, and Robert asked questions about their interests. Oliver liked to draw dinosaurs. Olivia preferred to write short poems about nature. Grace's eyes sparkled with pride listening to their chatter. Despite her reserved manner, it was clear she found immense joy in their achievements. When the visit concluded, Robert walked them to the museum exit. Outside, the city bustled with traffic, tourists, and the energy of a weekend afternoon. He felt a jolt of reluctance as they prepared to part ways. Grace gave him a polite smile. "Thank you again. The kids loved it." "It's the least I could do," he responded softly. He paused, gathering courage. "I'd like to keep in touch, if that's all right." Grace considered the request. Her posture remained composed, yet a hint of warmth emerged. "Yes, that would be okay." Oliver piped up. "We can show you our soccer moves next time," while Olivia nodded in agreement. "That sounds great," Robert said, resisting the urge to ruffle Oliver's hair. He settled for a quick pat on the boy's shoulder, his heart fluttering in a mix of joy and apprehension. As Grace guided the twins toward the subway station, Robert stood momentarily speechless, watching them blend into the crowd. His phone buzzed, another reminder from Bradley Green to meet soon. He inhaled, exhaled, and then turned away, stepping back into his chauffeur-driven car. In that instant, he realized he was perched on the edge of a pivotal decision. He had taken a tentative step into the unknown, forging a fragile connection with Grace and the children, but had yet to reveal the secret burning inside him. All the while, the world he had so meticulously built, complete with corporate deals and social prestige, felt tenuous. The final question pulsed through his thoughts. Could he truly give up this meticulously planned life to embrace a new path built on love, truth, and second chances? Robert's pulse quickened. Although dread clawed at him, he typed a short reply confirming he'd be there. Since the moment he hired Bradley to look into Grace's background and the twins' possible connection to his sperm donation, Robert had wrestled with a gnawing guilt. He hated prying into her life, but his questions wouldn't let him rest. He arrived at the modest building where Bradley's office resided. The detective was punctual and direct, ushering Robert into a small room lined with filing cabinets. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Bradley didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I've started digging. Based on some initial records, Grace McCarthy gave birth to twins, Oliver and Olivia, exactly 7 years ago. Her late husband passed away around 2 years prior to today, but my data suggests he was not the biological father." He paused, gauging Robert's reaction. A stinging tension spread through Robert's chest. "So you're saying that it's very likely the children are a result of an anonymous sperm donor," Bradley finished. "The specifics of who donated are sealed, but your timing at the bank you mentioned aligns suspiciously well." Robert pressed his lips into a tight line. Even though he'd suspected, hearing it confirmed made his heart pound. He asked, "What else did you learn about Grace?" Bradley flipped through his notes. "She's been a widow for 2 years, as you know. She works part-time at a community center, lives in a modest apartment, struggles financially. No indications of any foul play or hidden agendas. By all accounts, she's a decent woman who loves her kids." The dread in Robert's stomach grew heavier. Grace had no idea that the man she once dated so many years ago, the man from her past, was the same person who likely fathered her children. Or if she did suspect, she'd shown no sign. Bradley eyed him carefully. I can dig deeper if you want, but if you need absolute proof, we'll have to obtain DNA samples from you and at least one of the kids." The idea of sneaking a DNA sample from Oliver or Olivia made Robert's skin crawl. "Let's hold off on that for now," he muttered. "I'm not sure if I want to go behind their backs." Bradley nodded. "Understood. Let me know if you change your mind." "I'll keep this inquiry discreet." Robert left the office, stepping onto the bustling sidewalk as waves of conflicting emotions battered him. He was, by nature, a man of action, someone who saw a problem and fixed it. Yet this wasn't a simple transaction. How could he possibly break the news to Grace that he was the biological father of her kids, conceived through a process she'd likely chosen out of desperation? His phone buzzed again, this time from Mark Peterson. "You're needed at the office. Urgent." The text was concise, with no room for discussion. Fighting the swirl in his mind, Robert hailed a cab back to his high-rise headquarters. Inside the sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows, Mark confronted him. "We're on the verge of a massive deal, Robert. I'm trying to finalize contracts, but the board's concerned. They say you've been distracted, skipping meetings." Robert forced composure. "I'm handling personal matters, Mark. I'll be back on track soon." Mark exhaled, worry etched into the lines of his face. "I'm your friend, not just your business partner. If something's troubling you, you can talk to me." Robert considered confiding in him, but held back, uncertain how to phrase the revelation. "I appreciate it. Just trust me. I won't let the company down." The rest of the afternoon blurred into a series of hastily managed phone calls and half-hearted negotiations. Robert's mind drifted repeatedly to Grace, imagining her picking the twins up from school or preparing their dinner. She was doing it all on her own. The father, he was absent, a ghostly presence in their lives. By the time Robert finally stepped away from his office, dusk was settling over the city. He realized he had a choice: continue hiring investigators, keep secrets, and bury the truth, or begin a path toward honesty. But how to proceed without destroying what little trust he'd begun to build with Grace? He drove home in silence, the skyline's shimmering lights doing nothing to ease his turmoil. As he entered his penthouse, he sensed the emptiness of his immaculate rooms more acutely than ever. While he mulled over the revelations, one thing rang clear in his mind: he could not simply walk away from this. Not now that he knew the odds were so high that Oliver and Olivia were his own flesh and blood. The following week, Robert made a crucial decision: to step away, however briefly, from the relentless demands of his corporate empire. He delegated most immediate responsibilities to Mark, explaining that he needed time for personal matters. While Mark's brow furrowed with concern, he didn't protest. Their partnership and long-standing friendship allowed for mutual respect, even in uncertain times. Robert felt a pang of trepidation as he signed off on transferring limited power of attorney to Mark for certain projects, but it was necessary. He had a more pressing mission: to uncover the truth, not from a detective's file, but from Grace herself. Early one morning, Robert found himself outside Grace's apartment building, a modest red brick structure on the Upper East Side. He waited by the entrance, rehearsing in his mind how to approach her. The lingering question, however, was whether to reveal everything or proceed more cautiously. At last, Grace emerged with Oliver and Olivia. The twins carried small backpacks and looked sleepy but excited, their expressions brightening the drab sidewalk. Grace spotted Robert and hesitated, her grip on Olivia's hand tightening. "Good morning," he called gently, stepping forward. I was hoping I could walk you all to school, if that's not too strange." It sounded awkward, but there was sincerity in his voice. Grace regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "You want to walk with us?" She glanced at the kids, who already seemed thrilled to see him. Oliver broke into a grin. "Yes, Mom. Let's let him walk with us, please." Grace exhaled, her guard clearly up yet softened by her children's enthusiasm. "All right, but it's just 3 blocks to their school." As they navigated the busy sidewalks, cars honking and passers-by rushing by, Robert fell into step beside them. He asked about the twins' day-to-day lives, learning that Oliver loved art class, while Olivia enjoyed practicing cursive writing. Grace offered minimal details, as though still uncertain about his intentions. When they reached the school gates, a crowd of parents and children bustled about. Oliver and Olivia waved goodbye, each wearing a hopeful smile that tugged at Robert's heart. Grace lingered by the gate, looking suddenly uncertain about what to do next. "Thank you for letting me tag along," Robert said quietly. He noticed how her shoulders stiffened again, that protective instinct surfacing whenever she wasn't sure how much to trust him. "You're welcome," she responded, her tone polite but guarded. Glancing at the building, she added, "I usually head to the community center now. It's nearby." The opening was clear. Mustering his courage, Robert asked, "Do you mind if I walk you there? Maybe we can grab a coffee on the way." Grace appeared to weigh the offer, then gave a small nod. "I suppose I have a few minutes." They found a quiet coffee shop tucked between a pharmacy and a bookstore. After ordering 2 lattes, they took a small table near the back, away from the bustle. Grace removed her coat, revealing a simple blouse and slacks, and Robert was struck by her understated elegance. She met his eyes with a directness that unsettled him. "You're not exactly the type to wander around walking kids to school," she stated, taking a careful sip of her latte. "I see your name in newspapers, real estate deals, big projects. Why the sudden interest in my family?" Robert inhaled slowly. Every muscle in his body tensed as he formulated his response. "It's true. My life's typically consumed by work. But I can't really explain it. I just feel drawn to you and the children. Maybe it's that I don't have a family of my own, and I admire what you're doing as a single mother." She studied him, unconvinced. "I appreciate the help at the museum, but we're fine. I don't want you to feel obligated or pity us." There was a quiet strength in her tone, as though she was used to facing the world alone. "It's not pity," he assured her, voice low. "I respect your independence. I also realize this might sound abrupt, but if there's ever anything you or the kids need, anything at all, please let me know." Grace set her mug down, eyes flicking to the watch on her wrist. "I should go. My shift starts soon. Thank you for the coffee." Robert rose with her, feeling that he'd only grazed the surface of the conversation he truly wanted to have. Before he could say anything more, she stepped outside, the cool morning air ruffling her hair. "Take care, Robert," she said softly, then turned and walked away. He watched her retreating form, longing to call her back, to pour out confessions he wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Instead, he let her go, silently vowing that this would not be their last conversation. Standing alone on the sidewalk, Robert sensed he was at a pivotal crossroads. In making a conscious choice to step away from his corporate life, even for a short while, he had taken a tangible step over the threshold of his old world. There was no turning back. A week later, Robert found himself venturing deeper into Grace's world. On a crisp Saturday morning, he arrived at the community center where she worked, having volunteered to lead a real estate workshop for local residents. It was a small way he could give back, and it provided an excuse to learn more about Grace's environment. Inside, the aroma of fresh coffee and the echoes of lively conversation filled the hall. Posters about upcoming charity drives, children's art classes, and food bank collections decorated the walls. As Robert set up in a multi-purpose room, he spotted Grace on the far side, sorting files behind a small desk. She wore a patient expression while fielding questions from a senior volunteer. Once the workshop began, a small group gathered, mostly older residents seeking guidance on selling or renting homes. Robert found it oddly refreshing to talk to people whose concerns were simpler and more honest than those of the high-stakes investors he was used to. He explained basic real estate concepts, answered questions about tenant rights, and listened carefully as individuals voiced stories of financial strain. After the session, as attendees trickled out, Grace approached him. Her guarded demeanor remained, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity. "You speak well," she commented. "I can see why you've been so successful." He offered a modest shrug. "I'm more used to big boardrooms. This was different, and I enjoyed it." A flicker of a smile softened her features. "The people here appreciate any help they can get. Thank you for doing this." Robert's gaze drifted around the community center, a children's drawing taped to a column, a battered couch where a tired mother nursed an infant, a notice board advertising job openings. "This place means a lot to them, doesn't it?" Grace nodded. "We do what we can. Classes for kids, support for single parents, language lessons for immigrants. It's underfunded, but we try to stretch every dollar." He felt a tug of admiration. If these were the kinds of problems Grace grappled with daily, then all the more reason he wanted to be part of her life and the twins. But he held his tongue, not wanting to push too hard. Instead, he gestured to a side hallway. "Any chance you could show me around?" She hesitated, then relented. "Sure." As they walked, Grace pointed out various rooms. A small library where children read stories in beanbag chairs, a rec area with second-hand sports equipment, a sewing room where neighbors traded tips on repairing clothes. They reached a notice board plastered with colorful flyers, and Robert's eyes landed on a posted sign advertising a fundraising drive next month. "I'm guessing this is for the center." He tapped the flyer, which read, "Community Fundraising Gala with a suggested donation amount." Grace studied it. "Yes, the annual gala. It's a big deal for us. We try to raise funds to cover supplies, maintain the building, and pay staff like me." She chuckled ruefully. "Though staff is pushing it, we're mostly part-time workers and volunteers." An idea sparked in Robert's mind. "Would you want help with it?" "I have connections. Maybe we could increase donations." She bit her lip. "I'm sure the board members would be delighted. But you really don't have to. We can handle it." "I'd like to," he insisted, gentler now. "Consider it a way of giving back. If you let me invite some of my business associates, it might boost attendance. You wouldn't have to do anything uncomfortable. I'll keep it professional." Grace looked torn between gratitude and caution. Finally, she nodded. "All right, if you think it'll help the center, then thank you." They rounded a corner where they found a small courtyard. Empty benches lined the space, flanked by planters of wilted flowers that needed tending. It was quiet, a welcome break from the hustle inside. Grace took a seat on a wooden bench, and after a brief hesitation, Robert sat beside her. She inhaled the morning air. "I like coming out here when it's quieter. Helps me think." He observed her profile, small lines of exhaustion near her eyes, a determined set to her jaw. "You carry a lot on your shoulders," he remarked softly. "You shouldn't have to do it alone." Grace folded her hands in her lap. "I manage, after my husband passed." She paused, eyes drifting across the courtyard. "I had to figure things out. I found purpose here, helping others, and, of course, the twins keep me going." Robert's chest tightened. A surge of guilt and protectiveness flooded him. He longed to tell her everything, to say, "I might be their father. Let me help. Let me take some of this burden." But the words tangled in his throat. Unable to speak his truth yet, he said, "You're stronger than you realize. But if you ever want someone to lean on—" She held up a hand, interrupting. "I appreciate your kindness, Robert, but I'm not looking for a rescue. I just want what's best for my children." He nodded, respecting her boundary. In that instant, a memory flashed. The day he and Grace, as teenagers, had strolled together after school, dreaming up futures they never quite saw through. So much had changed since then, yet here they were, sitting side by side once more. The moment hovered, fragile yet charged. Then, the echo of footsteps signaled the arrival of another staff member, calling Grace's name from the entrance. She stood and offered Robert a parting glance. "Thank you for coming today. It really did help." He watched her depart, conscious that he was stepping ever deeper into a new realm. Gone were the days when corporate deals were his main source of purpose. He was now immersing himself in Grace's life, unsure whether it would bring relief or heartbreak when the full truth finally emerged. Robert felt both excitement and trepidation as he arrived at a youth soccer field the following Saturday morning. Grace had casually mentioned that Oliver and Olivia played in a small recreational league. Unable to resist, he volunteered to watch a match and cheer them on. The field, tucked away in a local park, bustled with parents setting out folding chairs, children warming up in brightly colored uniforms, and a few energetic dogs trotting alongside families. Spotting Grace near the sidelines, Robert approached, feeling a slight flutter in his chest at the sight of her and the twins. Olivia noticed him first. She grinned shyly before returning her focus to tying her shoelaces. Oliver waved, bounding over. "Hey, Mr. Harrison!" "I'm playing forward today." "Looking sharp," Robert replied, patting the boy's shoulder. "Ready to score some goals." Oliver puffed out his chest. "I'll try my best." Grace stood quietly, folding her arms. She acknowledged Robert with a slight smile. "I didn't expect you so early. The game starts in 10 minutes. I thought I'd find a good spot," he answered. Then he nodded at the kids. "I can't miss the warm-up." The children soon joined their teammates, leaving Grace and Robert side by side. He noticed she was wearing a warm sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked tired but content as she kept her eyes on the field. As the match began, Oliver dashed across the grass in pursuit of the ball, while Olivia played defense, meticulously guarding the goal area. Robert cheered for both of them, clapping whenever either touched the ball. He wasn't alone. Dozens of parents lined the field, shouting encouragement. After a particularly impressive pass by Olivia, Robert turned to Grace. "She's got good instincts. Did you teach her?" Grace shook her head. "Oh, no, I've never been into sports. They learned from watching videos online and practicing on their own. They're both determined when they set their minds to something." Pride lit her eyes. Robert reveled in seeing that spark, grateful to witness a glimpse of happiness amid her challenging circumstances. The game lasted nearly an hour. Oliver nearly scored a goal, and Olivia made a crucial interception. Their team eventually lost by a single point, but the children seemed too exhilarated to dwell on the defeat. After the final whistle, Oliver and Olivia dashed over, breathless and smiling. Grace offered each a water bottle, while Robert handed them small towels. "That was awesome," he complimented. "You both played incredibly well." Oliver wiped sweat from his forehead. "I almost scored." "You'll get it next time, buddy," Robert replied, feeling a strange swelling in his chest. This fatherly pride was new, both exhilarating and bittersweet. Grace suggested they celebrate with lunch at a nearby cafe. The twins enthusiastically agreed. As they all strolled through the park, Robert found himself in easy conversation with them, discussing the highlights of the game. Every so often, Grace chimed in, her earlier reserve melting under the children's infectious excitement. At the cafe, they snagged a corner booth. The twins promptly launched into chatter about new drills they wanted to try. Robert listened avidly, asking questions and offering encouragement. Meanwhile, Grace watched him carefully, as though trying to decipher his motives. Midway through the meal, Grace's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "Excuse me," she murmured, sliding out of the booth and heading outside to take the call. Left alone with the kids, Robert felt a soft tug on his sleeve. Olivia gazed up at him. "Are you a friend of Mom's?" she asked softly, her eyes big with innocence. Robert's throat constricted. "I hope so," he said, choosing his words cautiously. "I'd like to be a good friend to both of you, if that's okay." Oliver considered this, sipping his juice. "Mum's always tired. She works a lot. Sometimes she cries at night when she thinks we're sleeping. I just want her to be happy." A knot formed in Robert's stomach. "I'm sure she loves you very much and wants the best for you. Maybe I can help in some way." Before the conversation could go deeper, Grace returned, slipping back into her seat. Her face looked pale. "I'm sorry about that," she said quietly. "Just a call about some overdue bills." An awkward hush fell. Robert wanted to offer help, to ease her burden, but he remembered her pride and the caution in her eyes whenever money came up. Instead, he signaled for the check. "Thank you for lunch, Robert," she said gently. "You don't have to keep doing things like this, you know." "I want to," he replied, tucking his wallet away. "I enjoy spending time with you, all of you." She lowered her gaze, and for a moment, he thought he saw a flash of emotion. Gratitude, relief, it vanished too quickly to name. In that instant, he realized just how carefully she safeguarded her heart. When they parted ways outside, the twins gave Robert an enthusiastic wave goodbye, and Grace offered a softer wave of her own. Standing on the sidewalk as they headed off, Robert felt like he'd crossed yet another threshold. More than ever, he yearned to be part of their lives, but with each step he took, honesty loomed over him, its absence a ticking bomb he could not defuse forever. A few days later, Robert sat in a quiet back room of his office, scrolling through a list of potential donors for the upcoming community center fundraising gala. He had promised Grace he would help, and by calling in favors from business contacts, he believed he could deliver. A soft knock on the door startled him. Linda Miller poked her head in. "Your next appointment is waiting, but he says he doesn't mind if you're running late." Robert raised a brow. "He," Linda nodded. "Bradley Green, your investigator. He asked for a moment of your time." Robert's pulse skipped. He hadn't invited Bradley here, so the detective must have something urgent. "Send him in." Moments later, Bradley entered, his expression impassive as usual. "I hope this isn't inconvenient. I figured it was safer to talk here than out in public." Nodding, Robert closed the door behind them. "What's the news?" Bradley opened a slim folder. "I've done more checking, cross-referenced birth certificates and hospital records, all perfectly legal. From what I can gather, Grace's twins were indeed conceived via in vitro fertilization. The fertility clinic in question used an anonymous sperm donor exactly around the time you made your deposit." Robert's heart hammered. The final confirmation, yet hearing it stated so plainly, squeezed the breath from his lungs. "That's not all," Bradley continued. "Apparently, Grace listed her late husband as the intended father on certain forms, but after his passing, she continued with the procedure alone. She never updated the paternal information, so the official record remains ambiguous." Reeling, Robert lowered himself into a chair. His mind raced with images: Oliver's bright grin, Olivia's quiet sweetness, Grace's anxious eyes. They really were his children. Suddenly, all the moral dilemmas he'd tried to push aside flooded forward. Bradley snapped the folder shut. "What do you want me to do with this information?" After a moment of stunned silence, Robert exhaled. "Nothing further. That'll be all for now." When Bradley left, Robert's gaze trailed to the photo on his desk, a snapshot from a corporate event. He stood between influential bankers, his smile stiff, his posture assured. In that moment, the world he'd built felt oddly hollow. How much of it mattered compared to the two children who were his flesh and blood? That afternoon, Linda reminded him of a financial meeting. He went through the motions, delivering sharp insights on property acquisitions. But inside, his mind spiraled. What would Grace say if he told her? How would Oliver and Olivia react to discovering their real father was a stranger they'd only recently met? And could he blame Grace if she felt betrayed? Post-meeting, he walked the corridor with Mark Peterson. Mark studied him thoughtfully. "I can see something's on your mind, Robert. You can talk to me, off the record." They paused by a panoramic window overlooking Manhattan's skyline. Robert sighed. "I'm going through something complicated, but I can't fully disclose it yet. I'm not sure how." Mark glanced at him, sincerity warming his voice. "I've known you for decades. You're not usually this hesitant. Whatever it is, it must be significant." Robert nodded. "It is. I just need time." Mark patted his shoulder supportively. "Take all the time you need, but remember you don't have to handle it alone." That evening, Robert reviewed the fundraiser guest list he planned to circulate. Names of real estate tycoons, philanthropic CEOs, and wealthy socialites dotted the page. Could inviting them to a humble community center gala backfire? He wasn't sure, but if it meant generating donations to help Grace's workplace, and thus help Grace, he was willing to risk the social awkwardness. Before he left the office, he penned a brief note for Linda. "Linda, please gather contact details of potential donors for the gala. Also, reach out to the marketing team. We might sponsor some promotional materials." He sealed it in an envelope, preferring not to broadcast his intentions just yet. No matter the corporate ramifications, he felt compelled to do something meaningful for Grace and the children. In the quiet confines of his penthouse later that night, Robert stared at the city lights. The truth lay before him, its weight immense. There would be no perfect moment to tell Grace. Eventually, he would have to step forward and reveal the entire story. Yet the longer he waited, the more he risked appearing deceitful. He remembered the warmth in Oliver's eyes when he scored a near goal, Olivia's gentle pride after a successful defensive play, and Grace's resilience even in the face of overdue bills. These were now pieces of Robert's life too, whether he admitted it openly or not. Tomorrow, he resolved, he would see Grace again, and soon, very soon, he would muster the courage to speak the truth. After several more days of planning and nerve-wracking indecision, Robert finally decided to confront the matter head-on. He called Grace and asked if they could meet at a cozy family diner on the outskirts of Manhattan. Its red vinyl booths and checkered floors offered a quiet refuge from the bustle of downtown. When she arrived with Oliver and Olivia, Robert noticed the children's enthusiasm. Oliver all chatter about a class art project, Olivia softly humming a tune she was learning for a school recital. Grace greeted Robert politely, though her eyes held questions. They slid into a booth, and a cheerful waitress took their orders. Robert tried to settle the tremor in his hands by resting them on his lap. He needed to talk to Grace, but the kids were here too, and this revelation wasn't meant for their ears just yet. "So," Grace asked, stirring a soda with a straw, "why this place?" "It's nice, just, I've never been here before." Robert swallowed. "I wanted somewhere low-key, and I wanted to catch up with all of you." He shot a glance at Oliver, who was busy scribbling dinosaurs on a napkin, and Olivia, who gently tapped her fingers in a rhythm only she could hear. Grace's gaze lingered on him. "Is everything okay?" Before he could answer, Olivia looked up. "Mom, can I show Mr. Harrison my song? It's not finished, but I'm practicing for music class." Grace managed a small smile. "Sure, if he wants to hear it." Eager, Olivia started softly singing a few lines, her voice sweet and hesitant. The moment felt surreal to Robert. He listened, feeling a swell of tenderness he had never quite experienced. Was this what fatherhood felt like? The unbridled admiration for a simple tune delivered by a child's tentative voice. "That's beautiful," he murmured when she finished. "You've got a real talent," Oliver chimed in. "She's better at singing than I am at drawing dinosaurs. Mum says we should always practice what we love." Grace nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I believe in letting them explore their interests. I just wish I had more time or resources." She trailed off, regret creeping into her tone. Robert's chest tightened. He knew exactly how to help, but he was afraid to cross her boundaries. And beyond finances, the deeper issue still loomed. Telling her that he might be more than just a supportive friend, they finished their meals amid casual conversation, mostly driven by Oliver and Olivia's stories from school. At last, Grace noticed Robert's tense demeanor. "Hey," she said softly, "is something on your mind?" He hesitated, sensing the children's watchful eyes. "Could we, maybe step outside for a moment? Just you and me?" Grace looked wary. "Kids, do you mind hanging here while we talk? We'll be right outside that window." Oliver and Olivia nodded, Oliver already immersed in his drawings again. Outside, dusk had begun to color the sky in shades of lavender and orange. They stood near the diner's entrance, the muffled sounds of traffic in the distance. Grace wrapped her arms around herself as a light breeze passed. "I'm worried I might startle you," Robert began, voice low. "But there's something important I need to tell you about us and about Oliver and Olivia." Her expression shifted from curiosity to unease. "What do you mean?" He inhaled, willing himself not to back down. "Remember how, years ago, I struggled financially when we were younger? I made a donation to a sperm bank. I didn't expect it would lead to anything like this, but it might have." Grace's eyes widened, and her face went pale. "Are you saying—" Robert's heart pounded. "There's a strong chance I'm their biological father, Grace." She took a step back, disbelief mingling with shock. How is that even possible?" He explained briefly, the time frame, the records. "I promise I didn't know at first. When I met them, I saw a resemblance. I hired someone to check. Everything points to it. I'm sorry, Grace. I'm not trying to upend your life." Tears pooled in her eyes as she pressed a hand to her forehead. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why hire someone behind my back?" Emotions surged through him. "I was scared. I wanted to be sure, and I didn't want to hurt you or the children if it turned out to be nothing. But now, I don't know what to do next. I just know I can't stay silent." Grace clutched her arms as if she were trying to hold herself together. I went through the insemination because I believed I'd lost you and had no other options. My husband was gone, and we'd never had children. She trailed off, tears escaping down her cheeks. Robert reached for her hand, but she pulled away, eyes shimmering with a mix of fury and heartbreak. "No, don't, just give me a moment." He stepped back, remorse flooding him. He could hear the kids laughing inside, oblivious to the earthquake unfolding just outside the glass. Finally, Grace found her voice again. "Everything I've told them about their father, everything I believed, it's all jumbled now. How could you let this happen?" Her voice shook with anger. "And how dare you come into our lives without telling me?" Robert swallowed hard. "You have every right to be upset. I never meant to lie. I just didn't know how to handle it." She brushed away tears with the back of her hand, glancing inside at Oliver and Olivia, who were still lost in their own world. "I need time to think. And you need to give me space to figure out what this means for us, for them." Robert bowed his head. "Of course," he whispered, his own eyes stinging. Grace drew a trembling breath. I have to protect my children, Robert. I won't let them get hurt. She turned and walked back into the diner, leaving him standing alone in the fading light. In the glass reflection, he caught sight of his own anguished expression. The threshold he had crossed now led to a new territory of heartbreak and uncertainty. He could only hope that, in time, they might find a path forward, one that didn't shatter the fragile bonds he'd managed to form with the very family he'd never known he had. Grace McCarthy sat at her small kitchen table early the next morning, staring at her untouched cup of tea. The events of the previous evening replayed in her mind with relentless clarity. She had taken Oliver and Olivia home from the diner in hurried silence, giving them some excuse about grown-up discussions. Yet the entire way, her heart thundered with betrayal, confusion, and the faintest flicker of hope she struggled to extinguish. Robert Harrison, once the boy she had loved in high school, now a multi-millionaire magnate, might truly be the father of her twins. Across the apartment, Olivia and Oliver were in their room, chattering about the day ahead. She could hear Olivia practicing the same melody she'd sung at the diner, and Oliver rummaging through his art supplies. Usually, their joyful noises lifted her spirits, but this morning, everything felt too heavy. A soft knock sounded at the front door. Grace stiffened. She hadn't invited anyone. Standing, she padded over and peered through the peephole. To her surprise, she saw Sarah Adams, her 60-year-old neighbor who often helped watch the kids after school. Grace opened the door, ushering Sarah inside with a forced smile. "I was just coming to check on you," Sarah said gently, tapping her cane on the worn apartment floor. "I saw your face last night when you got home, like you'd seen a ghost. Everything all right?" Grace sighed, gesturing for Sarah to sit. "I don't know where to start, Sarah. Something massive happened." She lowered her voice, not wanting the kids to overhear. "Do you remember Robert? The man who took us to the museum and helped with soccer rides?" Sarah nodded. "The one who's been kind to the twins." Grace pressed her lips together. "He told me he's their biological father. Years ago, he donated to a sperm bank when we were out of touch. I used that same clinic to conceive Oliver and Olivia, and now—" Her voice broke. "He just told me everything." Sarah's eyes widened, but her tone remained calm. "Well, that's quite a shock." "Are you certain it's true?" Grace shrugged, tears pricking her eyes again. "He seemed certain, and it aligns with the timeline, but I feel so betrayed. How could I not have known?" She struggled to keep her voice steady. "I'm afraid of how Oliver and Olivia will handle it. They've always believed their father passed away. I never knew I was using Robert's donation." Sarah leaned in, resting a hand on Grace's. "You're allowed to feel angry. But maybe this is a chance for them to have a father figure. Don't dismiss the possibility of something good coming out of it." Grace inhaled sharply, grateful for Sarah's understanding yet overwhelmed by the suggestion. She glanced at the clock. It was nearly time for Oliver and Olivia to leave for school. "Please don't say anything to the children," Grace whispered, standing. "I need time to decide how to tell them." Sarah nodded firmly. "Of course. I won't say a word." Just then, Olivia appeared in the doorway, books in hand, Oliver trailing behind. "Mom, we're ready for school," Olivia said, her gaze flicking between Grace and Sarah. "Is everything okay?" Grace mustered a reassuring smile. "Yes, sweetie. Sarah and I were just chatting." Oliver scrunched his nose. "You look sad, Mom. Are you sure you're all right?" She knelt to meet their eyes. "I'm okay. There's just a lot on my mind." Her voice trembled slightly before she cleared her throat. "Come on, let's get going." They walked to school in near silence. The children, sensitive to her mood, refrained from their usual morning banter. Grace hated the tension that clung to them. She felt guilty for dragging them into her storm of worry. After dropping them off, Grace lingered outside the schoolyard fence, watching Oliver wave goodbye through the chain links and Olivia blow her a little kiss. Once they disappeared inside, she felt tears burning again. But she steeled herself, heading straight to the community center. She needed the distraction of work, even if her emotions were in disarray. At the center, as she sorted supplies in a cramped office, her phone buzzed. Robert's number lit up the screen. Her stomach twisted. She couldn't handle a conversation with him right now, so she let it ring until it went silent. A moment later, a text arrived. "Grace, please let me know you're okay. I'm so sorry for everything. I'll give you space, but I'm here if you need me." She stared at the message, her heart throbbing with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to reply with anger, to scream about how he had ambushed her life. Yet another part recalled the gentle way he'd treated Oliver and Olivia before all this, how the kids beamed when he was around. Still, the pain of the revelation was fresh. She tucked her phone away, pushing back tears. She would deal with Robert in her own time, once she figured out how to protect her children from yet another emotional upheaval. For the rest of the day, she forced herself to focus on her tasks at the community center. But each time she paused, her thoughts returned to those two unsuspecting 7-year-olds and the father they never knew they had, who was suddenly knocking at the gates of their lives. That evening, Robert paced his penthouse apartment, which suddenly felt more like a gilded cage than a luxurious home. Every surface was immaculate, every painting carefully chosen, every piece of furniture arranged for aesthetic perfection. Yet none of it offered comfort. A deep sense of failure gnawed at him. He had done the responsible thing by telling Grace the truth, but he hadn't anticipated such an overwhelming backlash. Her grief-stricken face haunted him. He wanted to fix this and fix it now, but recognized that pushing her would only compound her distress. His phone sat silent on the coffee table, no messages from Grace since his last text. He thought about calling Mark Peterson, his longtime friend and business partner, to unload his troubles, but he wasn't sure how to start that conversation. Mark knew something weighed on Robert's mind, yet remained in the dark about the details. Finally, Robert grabbed his keys and left. Being cooped up only intensified his anxieties. He found himself driving aimlessly through Manhattan, eventually crossing into Queens, then looping back. As the city lights blurred by, he recalled memories from high school, Grace at a school dance, wearing a shy smile when he clumsily asked her to slow dance. They were both dreamers back then, talking about the future as though it were a grand adventure waiting just for them. He parked outside a small, nondescript diner and stepped inside. After ordering a coffee, he chose a corner booth, scanning the menu as if he might actually eat. He sensed the eyes of the waitress lingering, possibly recognizing him from his media coverage, but he gave a polite nod and returned his focus to the swirl of turmoil in his head. Eventually, he summoned the courage to dial Mark. The phone rang only twice before Mark picked up, his voice tinged with concern. "Robert, is everything okay?" Robert exhaled a shaky breath. "Not exactly. Mind if I unload something heavy on you?" "Go for it," Mark replied. "I've been waiting for you to open up." Sipping his lukewarm coffee, Robert quietly relayed the entire story, from the sperm bank donation to the shocking discovery, all the way to revealing the truth to Grace at the diner. Mark listened in stunned silence. At last, Robert finished. "I'm sorry I kept you out of the loop." Mark let out a long whistle. "My God, Robert, that's quite a situation." "I feel lost," Robert admitted. "I can't focus on work. I can't stop thinking about Grace and the kids. And now she's furious and hurt, which is understandable. But I don't know how to make it right." Mark's reply was gentle but firm. You can't force your way in. If you push her now, she'll see it as another attempt to control the narrative. The best thing you can do is let her know you're there, ready to support her if she'll have it. Robert nodded, even though Mark couldn't see him. You're right. Mark's tone softened. I've watched you build an empire, Robert, but family is a different kind of challenge. You'll need patience, something you're not always good at. A half chuckle escaped Robert's lips. Patience. Got it. They hung up with the promise to talk again soon. Robert lingered at the diner a while longer, stirring sugar into his half-finished coffee. Mark was right. He had spent his adulthood ruthlessly chasing success, rarely slowing down for real human connection. Now, he stood at a crossroads where no business tactic could smooth over the emotional fallout. Before leaving, he spotted a young mother at a nearby table, wrestling with a toddler who kept trying to climb out of his booster seat. The exasperated look on her face resonated with him in a new way. Parenting was messy, unpredictable, and all-consuming. If Oliver and Olivia were indeed his, he had missed 7 years of their lives, 7 years of tantrums, first steps, giggles, and bedtime stories. The realization stung. He tipped the waitress generously and stepped into the chilly night air. A single question echoed in his mind. How could he earn Grace's trust and ensure the twins didn't suffer in the process? For a man accustomed to controlling outcomes, accepting that he might not have immediate answers was a hard pill to swallow. Yet, in that acceptance, he sensed the faint glimmer of a new kind of resolve, one rooted not in business acumen, but in genuine care for a family he hoped to embrace. Over the next few days, Grace avoided Robert's messages. She dropped Oliver and Olivia at school early and left the community center late, not wanting to risk running into him. The stress wore her thin, manifesting in restless nights and dark circles under her eyes, yet she found a ray of comfort in the mundane routines, packing lunches, helping Oliver with his art homework, listening to Olivia rehearse the same song over and over. These small tasks grounded her when everything else felt uncertain. One afternoon, after finishing her shift at the community center, Grace was about to head home when a familiar figure appeared in the lobby, Eleanor Richmond, Robert's 70-year-old godmother. Grace recognized her from the museum outing weeks ago. Eleanor walked with a gentle elegance, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that gave her an air of timeless grace. "May I speak with you, dear?" Eleanor asked politely, voice tinged with concern. Grace tensed, but she didn't sense any ill intent. "Of course. I have a few minutes." They found a quiet corner near a bulletin board plastered with flyers for ESL classes and food drives. Eleanor took a seat, looking at Grace with calm, knowing eyes. "I'm sorry to intrude. Robert doesn't know I'm here, but I felt it was necessary." Grace clasped her hands. "He's mentioned you before." "I know you were important in his life." Eleanor nodded, a fond smile touching her lips. "I helped raise him while his parents traveled for work. I've watched him evolve from a shy, determined boy into the man he is today." She sighed. "He told me everything, Grace, about the twins, about your history, about what happened at the diner. He's heartbroken over how it all came out." Grace felt a pang of guilt. She'd been furious at Robert, yet hearing about his heartbreak stirred conflicting emotions. He should have been honest from the start. "This changes everything for me and my children." Eleanor reached out, resting a gloved hand on Grace's. "I understand your anger, but please know that he truly didn't suspect the connection at first. By the time he realized, he was terrified of scaring you away. You see, Robert is brilliant in business but clumsy with matters of the heart." Silence stretched between them. Grace looked away, her eyes settling on a child's drawing pinned to the bulletin board, 2 figures holding hands under a rainbow. A wave of memory washed over her, she and Robert as teenagers, strolling hand in hand by the football field at dusk, whispering grand dreams for the future. "Do you want him in their lives?" Eleanor asked quietly, cutting through Grace's reverie. Grace bristled at the direct question. "I want to protect my kids. They've been through so much, losing the father they believed in. And now this." She paused, tears threatening to surface. "I'm not sure. I'm still sorting out my own feelings." Eleanor squeezed her hand gently. "You're a good mother. I see how you care for them, how you sacrifice. But maybe, just maybe, the children deserve to know they have a father who wants to be present. If you shut him out entirely, you might be denying them something special. Yet I understand you can't make that choice overnight." Grace swallowed hard, the thought swirling in her mind. She recalled the brightness in Oliver's eyes whenever Robert applauded his soccer moves, and Olivia's quiet fascination with Robert's stories. Had they instinctively sensed a connection all along? Eleanor stood, straightening her hat. "I won't pressure you. I only ask that you think it over. Robert will respect your boundaries. He just hopes for a chance to prove he can be there for Oliver and Olivia." A tear escaped down Grace's cheek. She brushed it away, nodding, "I'll consider it." With a sympathetic smile, Eleanor said her farewells and left. Grace remained rooted in place, heart pounding. Her rational mind warned her that letting Robert in could lead to heartbreak if he changed his mind or handled the situation poorly. But another part of her saw the potential for a real family, one that had been torn apart by circumstances neither she nor Robert could have foreseen. That night, as she helped the twins with their homework, she caught Oliver glancing at her with concern. "Mom, you look sad again." He fiddled with his pencil. "Is there something bad happening?" A pang shot through her. She hated being the source of their worry. "It's grown-up stuff," she said softly. "Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart." Olivia looked up from her spelling words. "Did something happen with Mr. Harrison? You haven't talked about him lately?" Grace froze. The children were more perceptive than she'd given them credit for. Unsure how to respond, she forced a small smile. "He's busy, and so am I. Things are complicated, but you two focus on your homework, okay?" They reluctantly returned to their assignments, casting occasional glances in her direction. Grace felt a rush of guilt. She knew she'd have to tell them the truth sooner rather than later. A part of her loathed the idea of shaking their world again, but the alternative, keeping them in the dark, felt equally wrong. As she tucked them into bed that night, Grace lingered by the door, watching their sleeping faces in the dim glow of a hallway lamp. Even amid the swirl of fear and anger in her own heart, a single thought rose to the surface. They deserve to know who their father is. But was she ready to let Robert fill that role? The tension escalated for Grace in the days that followed. She found herself encountering small obstacles that felt insurmountable under her emotional strain. An unexpected rent increase notice, a mistake on her utility bill, and a stack of overdue payments. Normally, she handled such setbacks with stoic determination, but now each problem felt like a personal affront, compounding her sense of being overwhelmed. At the community center, her co-worker Melissa, a kind-hearted woman in her 30s, noticed Grace's distraction. During a break, Melissa gently tapped Grace's shoulder. "Hey, you seem off. I know life's not easy for you, but you look more upset than usual. Want to talk?" Grace hesitated, eventually sighing. "It's complicated, Melissa. But basically, the father of my children came back into our lives under unexpected circumstances. I'm not sure how to navigate it." Melissa placed a comforting hand on Grace's arm. "That sounds intense, but maybe you can share the burden. Is he willing to help financially?" Grace winced at the mention of money. "He could, but I never wanted to rely on anyone's charity, especially not his. It's There's a lot of history. Melissa nodded sympathetically. Just remember, asking for help doesn't make you weak. It might help your kids have better opportunities. Then she offered a small smile. Sorry if I'm overstepping. I just hate seeing you struggle. Grace murmured a thank you, half-hearted though it was. A trickle of guilt seeped in. Maybe relying on Robert for some assistance wouldn't be so terrible. But she wasn't ready to make that leap. That evening, as she returned to her apartment, she found a small package outside her door. Tucked among the day's mail, the padded envelope bore no return address, just her name in neat lettering. Inside, she discovered a gift card to a children's clothing store and a note on expensive stationery. Grace, this is just a small gesture. I know you don't want pity, and I respect your independence, but please, if Oliver or Olivia need anything, let me help. Robert. A rush of conflicting emotions flooded her, annoyance at his continued intrusion, gratitude for his concern, and a twinge of relief at the possibility of easing her children's needs. She glanced warily at the gift card. It was for a substantial amount, enough to buy new clothes or shoes for both kids. She set it aside, not sure whether to accept or return it. A day later, she found a moment of quiet while Oliver and Olivia played a board game in their room. She picked up her phone, scrolling to Robert's number. Despite the anger and suspicion lingering in her heart, she pressed call. His voice on the other end sounded tense, yet undeniably hopeful. Grace, he asked, a wave of relief in his tone. Thank you for calling. She inhaled. I received your package. You didn't have to do that. I know, he replied, but I wanted to do something, however small, to support you and the kids. He paused. Does this mean we can talk? Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. Yes, but not tonight. I need time to think about how to handle this and how to tell them. Even saying the words stirred a storm in her chest. I understand. I'm here whenever you're ready, Robert said softly. And Grace. I'm sorry for everything, truly. She swallowed the lump in her throat, unable to muster a reply. After hanging up, she stood motionless, phone clutched in her hand. The sound of Oliver's laughter and Olivia's giggles floated from the next room, a painful reminder of what was at stake. That night, as she lay in bed, she imagined how the conversation might go. Kids, I have something important to tell you. Remember Mr. Harrison? He's actually your father? The mental rehearsal twisted her stomach in knots. She couldn't predict their reactions. Shock, confusion, anger, excitement, or all of the above. She also pondered what role she wanted Robert to play. Could she open her heart enough to let him co-parent? Did she dare allow him to fill the void of fatherhood in their lives? Fear clashed with a maternal desire to do what was best for the twins. The next morning, she gathered her courage. Over breakfast, she told Oliver and Olivia that they would have an important family discussion soon, but not to worry. The children exchanged curious looks but nodded. They sensed her seriousness. After dropping them at school, Grace turned her steps toward a small cafe, not the one where Robert first confessed, but another, quieter spot. She needed a place to think in solitude. Sipping a warm chai latte, she resolved to speak with Oliver and Olivia over the weekend. It might be messy, and it might hurt, but shielding them from the truth no longer felt right. Something in the depth of her heart whispered that this was a crucial turning point. Whether or not she accepted Robert's involvement, the children deserved to know. For too long, her life had been shaped by secrets, half-truths, and the need to survive. Maybe this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she learned to trust again, and in turn taught her children the power of honesty and resilience. Saturday afternoon found Grace taking a seat on the living room couch with Oliver and Olivia, the early autumn sun casting soft rays through threadbare curtains. She drew in a deep breath, nerves swirling. Her hands trembled slightly as she gestured for them to turn off the TV. Both children looked at her with questioning eyes. "Mom, is something wrong?" Olivia asked, pulling a pillow onto her lap. Oliver leaned forward, lips parted in worry. "You said we'd have a family talk. Are we in trouble?" Grace mustered a gentle smile. "No, you're not in trouble. This is about—" She paused, her heart hammering. "It's about Mr. Harrison." The twins' faces brightened in recognition. "Is he okay?" Olivia asked. "We haven't seen him in a while." Grace exhaled, bracing herself. "He's fine. But there's something very important you need to know." She patted the couch beside her, and the children scooted closer. "Remember how I told you your father passed away? The man I was married to died before you were born. I loved him. But," she swallowed, "he wasn't your biological dad." A hush fell, so profound that Grace could hear a car passing on the street outside. She placed a reassuring hand on each child's shoulder. "I didn't know it at the time, but you were conceived using the donation of another man, someone I used to know." Oliver's eyes flicked with confusion. "You mean we have a different dad?" "Yes," Grace's voice quivered. "It's Mr. Harrison." The reaction was immediate. Olivia let out a small gasp, her eyes widening. Oliver drew back, brows furrowing. They both glanced at each other, shock and disbelief rippling between them. "So, are you sure?" Oliver asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Grace nodded, her own eyes filling with tears she fought to hold back. "Very sure. He only found out recently, and he told me a little while ago. It's been hard for me, and I know it's going to be hard for you too, but I thought you deserved the truth." For a moment, the twins simply absorbed the revelation. Then Olivia's lower lip trembled. "Does that mean he's our real dad?" She sounded both scared and hopeful. Grace's breath caught. "Yes, biologically. But that doesn't change how much I love you or how we've lived our lives. You're still the same amazing kids you were yesterday." Oliver glanced down at his hands. "Why didn't you tell us before?" Hurt seeped into his voice, and Grace's chest constricted. "I didn't know," she admitted, tears blurring her vision. "I only learned the truth recently. I never meant to lie. I always believed the man I married was your father, even though we used a donor. Your dad was supportive of it before he passed. But I never realized the donor was Mr. Harrison." Silence stretched. Then Olivia asked, "Does that mean he wants to be our dad now?" She looked uncertain, as though the idea was both wonderful and terrifying. Grace hesitated, wiping her cheeks. "He wants a chance to know you both better, but I told him we needed time. I wanted to talk to you first." Oliver's eyes shone with tears he refused to let fall. "He's fun. He's nice. I like him. But we barely know him." Grace nodded. "I know. That's why I'm giving you a choice. If you want to spend time with him, we'll figure out how. If you don't, I'll respect that too." Olivia scooted closer, hugging Grace. "He doesn't have to replace Dad or anything, right?" "No," Grace murmured, her arms encircling Olivia. "He's never going to replace the man I was married to. But he could be part of your life if you want." Oliver wiped his nose on his sleeve, blinking hard. "I kind of do want that. He's cool, but I'm mad that we didn't know. It's confusing." Grace stroked his hair. "I understand, sweet boy. It's confusing for all of us." They lingered on the couch, huddled in a mixture of tears and tentative relief. In that fragile moment, Grace felt a strange hope take root. The children were shocked, even hurt, but not entirely opposed to the idea of letting Robert in. Perhaps this was the start of a new dynamic, one built on honesty instead of secrets. Later that afternoon, she sent a short text to Robert. "I told them. They have questions, but they're open to seeing you. Let's talk soon." He replied almost instantly, "I'm here whenever you're ready." "Thank you, Grace." The next hurdle would be navigating the children's first real meeting with Robert as their father, not just as Mr. Harrison. Grace braced herself for the trials to come, knowing the path was fraught with emotional landmines. Yet as she watched Oliver and Olivia start a puzzle together in the living room, she allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. Maybe, just maybe, they could forge a family bond out of this unexpected twist in their lives. The following weekend, Grace arranged a meet-up with Robert so Oliver and Olivia could see him in a new light. Not just Mr. Harrison, but the father they never knew they had. They chose a small cafe near the children's favorite park, someplace that felt comfortable and familiar. Grace arrived first with the twins, her stomach roiling with anticipation. She watched Oliver and Olivia fidget, their expressions a jumble of excitement and nerves. When Robert appeared, dressed more casually than usual in dark jeans and a neatly pressed shirt, both children looked at him with an intensity that stilled his steps. He paused a few feet away, heart in his throat. "Hi," he said softly, voice taut with emotion. "Thank you for letting me see you all today." Oliver squirmed in his chair. "So, I guess you're, our dad?" It was a child's question, yet it carried the weight of an entire world. Robert swallowed. "Yes, I am, biologically, and I hope. More than that, if you'll let me. But I understand if you need time to figure this out." The twins exchanged a glance. Olivia spoke next, her tone gentle but uncertain. "We like you, Mr. Harry, I mean Dad." Her cheeks reddened as she stumbled over the word. It's weird right now." A faint smile touched Grace's lips. She reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Olivia's shoulder. "It's okay to feel weird. This is a big change." Robert slowly sat down, careful not to overstep. "I know it's confusing," he said to both children, "and I'm sorry I wasn't there from the start, but I want to be here for you now, however you need me." He ventured a quick look at Grace, silently acknowledging the heartbreak he'd caused. Oliver inhaled, clearly mustering courage. "If you're really our dad, does that mean we can do stuff together? Like, just us and you sometimes?" Robert's eyes lit with relief. "Of course. We can go to your soccer practices, maybe visit the art store for more dinosaur drawing supplies, or whatever you want." A fragile hope flickered in Oliver's expression. Grace watched the exchange, her own heart twisted by a mix of emotions, sorrow for what they had all missed, yet cautious optimism for what might be built. They spent the next hour talking in halting, sometimes awkward conversation. Oliver asked about Robert's work, stumbling over the idea of a real estate empire. Olivia wanted to know if he had any pets and was momentarily disappointed to learn he didn't, though Robert promised he'd take them to a nature center sometime to see animals. Grace observed quietly, interjecting when the children hesitated or looked overwhelmed. At one point, Robert reached into a small bag he'd brought along. He handed each child a separate gift. For Oliver, a sketchpad with quality drawing pencils, and for Olivia, a small journal with musical note motifs on the cover. Both children thanked him, eyes shining with surprise and curiosity. Grace tensed momentarily, worried about whether the gifts might feel like bribes, but the twins seemed genuinely pleased. "Thank you," Olivia whispered, running her fingers over the journal's patterned cover. "You're welcome," Robert replied softly. "I thought you'd like a place to write down your songs." Soon, the children grew eager to test out their new items. They excused themselves to a nearby table, where Oliver sketched a quick dinosaur and Olivia jotted down a short verse of lyrics. The cafe bustled with weekend chatter, but at that moment, the world felt narrowed to just their little group. Left momentarily alone, Grace and Robert shared a weighted silence. She studied him, the pinch of regret in his expression, the tender way he watched the twins. Despite her lingering anger, she couldn't deny he genuinely cared. "I appreciate you letting them set the pace," she said at last, voice hushed. "It means a lot." He nodded, eyes earnest. "I'm in no position to force anything. I just want them to know I'm here, consistently." Grace breathed deeply, bracing herself. "I'm planning on being honest with them about what happened, how I never realized you were the donor at the fertility clinic. They've started asking bigger questions. Eventually, they'll want the full story." Robert's gaze darkened with remorse. "When they're ready, I'll tell them the truth. I don't want secrets anymore." A wave of relief washed over her. She glanced at the children, bent over their new gifts. For all the pain and confusion that lingered, this moment felt like a trembling first step towards something resembling family. As they gathered their things to leave, Oliver turned to Robert, still clutching the sketchpad. "Maybe, next weekend we could do that art store trip." His tone wavered with shy anticipation, Robert's face lit with a tentative smile. "Absolutely. I'd love that." Grace looked on, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. While the situation was far from resolved, she saw the fragile bonds forming. It was in that hope, that opening for love and reconciliation, that she sensed the approach of a greater test, one that would require even more courage, honesty, and unity than any of them had yet shown. In the days following their cafe meeting, an uneasy calm descended on Grace's household. Oliver's and Olivia's moods seemed lighter, as though the mere possibility of having a father in their lives brought a new kind of hope. Yet Grace remained anxious, acutely aware that deeper issues were bound to emerge as the children processed the truth. One evening, after the twins had gone to bed, Grace curled up on her worn couch, a blanket draped over her legs. She stared at the television, but her mind stayed fixed on Robert. In the last text he'd sent, he'd shared how thrilled he was that the children seemed open to spending time with him. He also reiterated his willingness to help financially, though he made it clear he respected her pride and boundaries. Flicking the TV off, Grace sighed. She reached for a tattered photo album on the coffee table, one that held pictures of her late husband and her wedding day. They had been happy for a time, planning to have children, but fate had stolen that chance in a cruel twist, leaving her widowed and alone. Looking at those photos now, she felt a flash of guilt. Was she betraying her husband's memory by allowing Robert into their children's lives? She traced a finger over a particular photo, a smiling young couple who believed the future promised nothing but light. The ache in her chest deepened. She spoke aloud, a quiet confession to the man whose memory she still cherished. "I hope you understand. I never meant to replace you, but Oliver and Olivia need a father, and maybe I do too." The realization startled her. She needed support, not necessarily romantic love, but someone to share the weight of parenting and the future. Melissa's words replayed in her mind. "Asking for help doesn't make you weak." Taking a shaky breath, she closed the album and headed to bed, her sleep restless with dreams of a family that melded past and present in ways she could barely grasp. The following morning, Grace woke early to find Olivia sitting at the kitchen table, carefully writing in her new journal. "You're up before the alarm," Grace said softly, sliding into the chair beside her daughter. Olivia glanced up, her eyes clouded with thought. "I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about Dad, Mr. Harrison. Grace reached for the child's hand. "You can call him what feels comfortable. There's no rush." Olivia bit her lip. "He's nice. I like him. But why didn't he come earlier? A pang of regret twisted Grace's heart. He didn't know, and I didn't either. Life can be complicated, sweetheart. Olivia nodded, accepting the explanation in that thoughtful way she had. Mom, do you think he'll stay, or will he go away again? Grace's chest tightened. She thought of Robert's earnest promises. I believe he truly wants to stay. Sometimes adults make mistakes, but I think he wants to do better now. Looking somewhat reassured, Olivia returned to her journal. Grace quietly moved to the stove to start breakfast, her mind a swirl of gratitude and fear. Later that day, Sarah Adams dropped by, carrying a small grocery bag. I brought some extra fruit and snacks, she announced, depositing the bag on Grace's counter, her gaze sharpened with curiosity. How are you holding up? Heard from Robert lately? Grace mustered a slight grin. We all met up a few days ago. It was tense, but also kind of hopeful. The kids took it better than I expected. Sarah settled on a kitchen stool, Kane resting against the wall. That's good to hear. And you? It can't be easy, juggling the memory of your late husband and welcoming Robert into the picture. Her words echoed Grace's private musings. She exhaled, shoulders drooping. I feel guilty, confused, and relieved all at once. It's like I'm betraying a memory and also finally giving the kids something they've always deserved. Sarah patted her arm gently. We can't live in the past forever, dear. You have a good heart, and so does Robert, from what I've seen. If this is meant to be, it'll take root in time. Grace whispered a thanks, tears threatening to blur her vision. She nodded, forging a resolve to keep moving forward, one step at a time. That afternoon, while sorting through mail, she found another letter from her landlord, final notice for a rent hike that would take effect next month. Her stomach knotted in dread. Her finances were already stretched to breaking. For years, she'd managed to scrape by, but with the cost of living climbing, she wasn't sure how to keep going without sacrificing essentials for the twins. Just as a wave of despair threatened to wash over her, her phone buzzed. Robert's name appeared on the screen. She hesitated, then answered. Grace, came his gentle voice. I was wondering if we could meet again soon. The kids mentioned they might want to do something this weekend. A trip to the art store, perhaps. A swirl of relief and anxiety gripped her. Part of her longed to confide in him about the rent hike and looming financial crisis. But she bit her tongue. It was too soon to lean on him that heavily. Yes, she said, forcing a pleasant tone. I'm sure they'd like that. Inside, turmoil roiled. She desperately needed help, but feared losing her independence or worse, letting the kids see her reliance on Robert's money. She told herself she'd make it work somehow, just as she always had. Yet in the back of her mind, she wondered if this new bond might not only mend old wounds, but also carry her through the storm that lay ahead. Robert arrived at Grace's apartment the following Saturday morning, finding Oliver and Olivia waiting eagerly in the foyer. Their eyes lit up at the sight of him. Though each wore a subdued excitement, it would take time before unguarded joy replaced caution. Grace lingered nearby, arms crossed, her expression a careful mix of warmth and reserve. He offered a gentle smile. Ready for the art store, guys? I hear they have a new dinosaur figure display. Oliver grinned. Yes, can we see it first? Olivia, holding her small journal, nodded in quiet agreement. I want to look at the music section. They sometimes have instruments for beginners. Robert glanced at Grace. Would you like to join us, or do you prefer some quiet time? Grace caught a subtle note of deference in his question. He was letting her decide how much she wanted to be involved, how much she trusted him. Actually, I'll come along, she said. If that's okay. A breath of relief escaped Robert. Of course, let's all go. They made their way to his car, a practical sedan instead of his usual chauffeur-driven town car. Robert had deliberately chosen something less ostentatious, sensing Grace's discomfort with excess. The ride was quiet but comfortable, the children occasionally pointing out interesting sights along the way. Grace, seated in the front passenger seat, stared out the window, lost in thought. At the art supply store, Oliver darted ahead to a shelf brimming with sketch pads and colored pencils. He compared brands and textures as if it were the most important decision in the world. Olivia gravitated to a small stand displaying acoustic guitars, running her fingers over the strings of a child-sized instrument. Meanwhile, Grace hovered, her eyes drifting over price tags with a troubled furrow in her brow. Robert noticed her expression. He approached gently. "If they want something, please don't worry about cost today. I'm happy to cover it." She stiffened slightly, turning to him. "I appreciate the offer, but you don't have to buy them expensive supplies. I don't want them to feel entitled." He nodded, voice quiet. "I understand. We can pick something modest. Still, let's not deprive them of the chance to explore their talents." Grace drew in a steadying breath. She knew her pride was flaring up again, but a glance at Oliver, who was painstakingly comparing watercolor pencils, softened her resistance. "All right," she relented. "Thank you." They ended up with a few items: a mid-range sketchpad and pencils for Oliver, plus a simple starter guitar for Olivia, who promised to practice diligently. As they headed to the checkout, Robert's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, frowning when he recognized the number, one of his publicists. He silenced it, not wanting to interrupt the moment. Outside, the fall breeze carried a hint of cooler weather to come. The twins ran ahead, excitedly discussing what they'd try first when they got home. Grace trailed behind with Robert, who carefully cradled the guitar in one arm. "Thank you," she said softly, studying the sidewalk. "I know you're doing a lot. And I know it must be hard balancing your life and all this." Robert gave a wry chuckle. "My board of directors is losing patience, but Mark has kept them at bay. My biggest challenge is navigating all these new emotions. I've never felt so uncertain, yet determined, about something in my life." She glanced at him. "Welcome to parenting. It's a constant mix of fear and love." A half smile curved his lips. "I'm starting to see that." They reached the car, and Robert loaded the purchases into the trunk. As the kids settled in the back seat, Grace paused before climbing into the passenger side. "Listen, about finances." Her voice dropped. I got hit with a rent increase. It's tough on top of everything else." Her cheeks colored as she forced the words out. "I'm not asking for a handout, but if you could teach me about your budgeting or money management skills, maybe I can make better decisions." His expression softened. "Of course, I can show you how to plan or invest or just talk through budgeting. Whatever you need." A breath of relief escaped her. She had resisted leaning on him for so long, but maybe there was value in letting him share his expertise. "Thank you," she murmured. "I appreciate that more than you know." The ride back to the apartment was livelier. Oliver sketched a dinosaur with a rocket pack, proudly showing it off to Olivia, who tapped out a rhythm on the edge of her new guitar case. Grace remained quiet, but wore a tentative smile, and Robert felt a cautious surge of hope. Once, at Grace's apartment, the twins dashed inside to test their new treasures, leaving Robert and Grace in the corridor. He cleared his throat. "I should go. Let you all enjoy the rest of the day." She nodded. "Thank you for everything." Her voice cracked slightly, revealing the emotional toll. "I know it's not easy, but I'm starting to see there could be room for you in our lives." A flicker of deep gratitude passed over Robert's face. Without overstepping, he leaned closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." With that, he turned to leave. Grace closed her door, exhaling shakily. Perhaps, for the first time in years, she felt less alone in the uphill battle of parenting. Yet the road ahead promised more challenges, especially as the twins adapted to this new reality, and as Robert balanced the demands of his high-profile world with the fragile bonds he was forming with his children. Early the next week, Mark Peterson stepped into Robert's corner office, closing the glass door behind him. Sunlight streamed over the polished table, and the usual hum of the city below was muted by the double-paned windows. Mark's expression suggested a serious conversation lay ahead. "You've been absent from the high-stakes negotiations," Mark said, voice measured. "Our investors are getting antsy. They want to see you. They want to hear your reassurances that this next project is still on track." Robert rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of his dual life. On one hand, the pressing needs of his corporation. On the other, the delicate family situation he was navigating. "I know, it's just complicated." Mark nodded, taking a seat across from him. "Look, I'm not here to lecture you, but we're in the final stage of a billion-dollar deal. If you vanish, the board might interpret it as negligence." Robert exhaled. "I haven't vanished. I've delegated more than usual, but I'm still here." "Delegating is one thing. Being absent is another," Mark countered, though his tone stayed sympathetic. "You've always been the linchpin of these negotiations. Your presence reassures everyone." Silence settled for a beat. Robert recalled how, just a few months ago, his entire world revolved around contracts, expansions, and profit margins. Now, all of that felt secondary compared to the tenuous relationships he was forging with his children and the trust he was slowly mending with Grace. "Is there a middle ground?" Mark asked softly. "Can you commit to half-days at the office? Or certain critical meetings, at least?" "Show your face, calm the investors." Robert leaned back in his leather chair. "Yes, I'll do that. I owe it to the company. Just keep me posted on which meetings are absolutely crucial." A small, relieved smile broke through Mark's stern expression. "You've got it." Then, more quietly, "How are things with Grace and the kids?" Robert slumped slightly, letting out a breath. "Better. The children know the truth now. We've had a couple of outings." "It's awkward, but there's hope." Mark nodded. "Good. Well, let me know if you need anything else." Rising, he added, "And don't forget, we've got the big fundraiser at the community center soon. I'm planning to attend. Bring a few people." "That's still happening, right?" "It is," Robert confirmed. He'd nearly forgotten in the chaos. "Grace is counting on it. It's essential for the center's budget." "Then I'll see you there." Mark gave a thumbs up and exited, leaving Robert alone with the knowledge that multiple storms converged: the corporate demands, the fatherhood revelations, and the upcoming gala that would draw him and Grace into the same public space. And overshadowing it all was the knowledge that the truth about him being a father might leak to the media at any moment. Later that afternoon, Robert spent hours reviewing contracts, making phone calls, and smoothing out investor concerns. Just as he closed his laptop, his phone chimed with a text from Grace. "About that fundraiser. Are you free to come by the center today? We need to finalize plans." A sense of relief spread through him, grateful she wanted him involved. He replied swiftly, "Of course, I'll be there in an hour." When he arrived at the community center, the corridors buzzed with last-minute preparations. Volunteers assembled gift baskets and hung decorations, while staff discussed seat arrangements. Grace stood near a table, stacked with donation envelopes. She looked up as he approached, and a flicker of a smile curved her lips, hesitant but sincere. "Thanks for coming," she said. "We're short-staffed and running out of time." Robert loosened his tie. "I'm here to help. Just tell me what needs doing." She handed him a list of tasks: contacting donors, arranging a small stage for speeches, finalizing food orders. He got to work, making calls and coordinating logistics. It felt strangely refreshing. an entirely different world from the opulent galas he was used to, where black-tie dress codes and seven-course meals were standard. This event was modest, but its sincerity and community spirit gave it a warmth he rarely experienced in high-society fundraisers. As they worked side by side, Grace's guarded demeanor softened. She found him double-checking an invoice and let out a light laugh. "You're actually pretty good at this." He glanced up, raising an eyebrow playfully. "I happen to be a master of spreadsheets and negotiations, remember?" She chuckled, the sound surprising even her. "Right. Hard to forget." A comfortable rhythm settled in, punctuated by shared glances and the occasional brush of hands as they passed materials back and forth. At one point, Grace asked for his opinions on table placements, and he offered thoughtful suggestions about creating space for wheelchair accessibility, something many big-shot events overlooked. Her expression showed gratitude, and he realized just how important these details were to her. As evening approached, the volunteers wrapped up for the day. Grace gathered her belongings, tension creeping back into her posture as the day's adrenaline faded. Robert noticed, stepping closer. "You okay?" She nodded, though her eyes looked tired. "Just hoping the gala raises enough funds. We really need every dollar." He hesitated, then spoke. "I might be able to bring in some key donors. My network is big, and many of them love positive publicity." She offered a soft, weary smile. "Then I'll trust you to handle that. And thank you, Robert, for all of this." An impulse to hug her flickered, but he restrained himself. Instead, he simply nodded. "Any time. Call me if you need more help." Grace walked him to the door, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. They paused before saying goodbye, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Despite the complexities and heartaches, they were slowly forging a partnership, not just for the kids, not just for the fundraiser, but for a future that might hold healing for both of them, if they braved the final test that was surely on its way. The night of the community center fundraiser arrived, casting a glow of anticipation over the modest auditorium. Paper lanterns hung from the ceiling, and clusters of cheerful flowers adorned tables covered in simple white cloths. Despite a tight budget, Grace and the volunteers had managed to transform the space into something inviting and elegant. The air buzzed with hushed excitement as guests began trickling in, local families, small business owners, and a sprinkling of well-dressed individuals from Robert's circle. Grace stood near the entrance, greeting people warmly. She wore a navy blue dress, modest yet flattering, her hair carefully pinned up. The nerves in her stomach churned with every new arrival. This event was critical for the center's survival. She glanced anxiously at the donation box near the stage, silently willing it to fill. Suddenly, a wave of hush fell as Robert entered, flanked by Mark Peterson and a few high-profile acquaintances. All eyes seemed drawn to him, his commanding aura at odds with the cozy community space. Grace felt a flutter in her chest, remembering how different their worlds had once been. But when their gazes met, he offered a gentle smile, crossing the room to greet her. "You look lovely," he murmured, leaning in so only she could hear. "And this place looks amazing. Everyone's done a great job." Her tense shoulders relaxed a fraction. "Thank you, and thanks for bringing donors. I really hope we can reach our goal tonight." He nodded, then turned to introduce her to a grey-haired gentleman wearing a tailored suit. "This is Edward Brandt, CEO of a philanthropic foundation. He's expressed interest in supporting youth programs, so I thought I'd bring him along." Grace extended her hand. "We're very grateful you're here, Mr. Brandt." He smiled politely. "It's a pleasure to see the work you all do in person. Robert speaks highly of this place, and of you." She felt her cheeks warm, but pushed the feeling aside to focus on forging connections. As the evening progressed, Grace and Robert moved through the room, introducing people to the center's mission and highlighting success stories. Meanwhile, Oliver and Olivia darted around, excitedly greeting familiar faces. They'd decided to attend for the first half of the event, wearing their Sunday best, Oliver sporting a tiny tie and Olivia proudly clutching her guitar in case she gathered enough courage to play. Music from a small live band drifted through the hall, adding a festive touch. By the time the dinner buffet opened, the donation box had begun to fill. Mark and Edward Brandt pledged substantial sums, leading the way for several other wealthy attendees to follow suit. Grace's heart leapt with each new pledge, relief and excitement flooding her. Midway through the evening, Robert pulled her aside. "I heard the kids might be performing a short piece." He pointed toward Olivia, who was hugging her guitar case nervously. Grace nodded. "She volunteered at the last minute, says it's a new song. Oliver wants to show some of his dinosaur drawings too. They're turning into quite the little performers." Robert's eyes brightened. "I'd love to watch. Should we head over to the stage?" They made their way through the crowd. An MC called for everyone's attention and welcomed two of our wonderful community children to the small platform. Oliver timidly displayed a few sketches on a stand, describing them with surprising poise, while Olivia stepped to the microphone with her guitar. She cleared her throat, glancing at Robert and Grace. When she caught their encouraging smiles, she began playing a gentle melody. Her soft voice filled the space, and though the tune wavered in places, the heartfelt lyrics about family and hope captivated the audience. Robert stood transfixed, tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. Grace watched him out of the corner of her vision, heart full of an emotion she could only name as tenderness. How surreal it was to see them united, rooting for the same precious children. The performance ended with applause echoing off the modest walls. Olivia practically glowed under the praise, while Oliver high-fived his sister. Grace stepped forward to give them both a quick hug. Then, with her arms still around Oliver, she met Robert's gaze. He approached, eyes shimmering. "You two were incredible," he told the twins, voice thick. "Thank you for sharing that with us." Oliver grinned. "Oh, we're glad you saw it, Dad." The word slipped out naturally this time, causing Robert's breath to hitch. He pulled Oliver into a gentle side hug, and Grace felt her throat constrict with emotion at the sight. The MC gently tapped the microphone, announcing a final round of donations. As people lined up to contribute, Grace darted away to help manage the process. She watched in awe as the donation box filled beyond her expectations, tears of gratitude welling up. The community center might just survive another year or more, and Robert's connections had made a critical difference, though she knew it was the children's authenticity that truly won hearts tonight. When the formalities ended, Robert caught Grace's hand, drawing her aside into a quieter corner. "We did it," he whispered, eyes bright, "and the kids were amazing." Grace trembled from the emotional intensity of the night. "I can't thank you enough. You helped save this place, and maybe gave Oliver and Olivia a new sense of confidence, seeing how proud we are of them." He brushed a thumb over her knuckles, expression solemn. "I just want to be part of their world, part of your world, whatever that looks like. I know it's early, and we have a long road, but I'm committed." She stared at him, unsure whether to let tears fall. Every defense she'd built seemed to soften. "They're starting to trust you." "And so am I," she said quietly. "Let's keep taking it step by step." Robert squeezed her hand in silent agreement. In the background, guests chatted happily. The band resumed a gentle tune, and Oliver and Olivia giggled over a compliment from Mark. In that moment, the air brimmed with promise, as though they'd passed a crucial test. Yet Grace sensed an even greater trial might loom, the final reckoning with the past and the acceptance of what the future could hold. For now, however, they allowed themselves a breath of celebration, the sweet taste of triumph after weeks of uncertainty. Their greatest challenges were not yet over, but standing there, surrounded by laughter, music, and hope, they felt a rekindled belief that, if they stayed true to each other, they could face whatever the next trial might bring. In the soft light of a Sunday morning, Grace awoke with a sense of cautious serenity. The community center fundraiser, just 2 nights prior, had been an overwhelming success. Donations soared well above the target, and the children's small performance dazzled everyone. She couldn't stop thinking about how the crowd applauded for Olivia's timid guitar strumming and Oliver's earnest artwork display. Above all, she remembered the pride illuminating Robert's face as he watched them. Now, as she moved about her modest apartment, preparing breakfast, that memory eased her worries. Oliver sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a brand-new dinosaur encyclopedia, an unexpected gift from Mark Peterson, while Olivia practiced chords on her guitar, humming softly. For the first time in ages, Grace felt something resembling hope settling in her chest. When the doorbell rang, she exchanged a quick glance with the twins. "I'll get it," she said, padding to the door. Swinging it open, she found Sarah Adams, cane in hand, wearing a bright scarf that matched the optimistic sparkle in her eyes. "Good morning," Sarah greeted. "I couldn't stay away after that wonderful event. I wanted to see how you're doing." Grace stepped aside. "Come in. I was about to serve scrambled eggs if you're hungry." Sarah smiled warmly. "Don't mind if I do." Once inside, she greeted Oliver and Olivia with grandmotherly hugs before settling on a creaky chair. "So, how are you feeling after the big night?" Grace twisted her apron strings, reflecting, "Relieved, grateful, and still a little anxious, I suppose. We raised enough funds to keep the community center going for another year, which is beyond what I hoped for. But we're also adjusting to, well, all these changes." Sarah nodded in understanding. "Robert has been a blessing, hasn't he? I know it's complicated, but you can't deny his heart's in the right place." Grace poured orange juice into a chipped glass. "He's helped in ways I never imagined, and not just financially. He's shown up for the kids, for me. It's more than I dared hope for." A small smile curved her lips. "I'm still figuring out how it all fits together. But yes, he's been a blessing." They ate breakfast in comfortable conversation, the twins chattering about their next soccer game and the new music Olivia wanted to learn. Sarah offered advice on planting window herbs, telling them how fresh basil could liven up any meal. When the dishes were cleared, Grace led Sarah to the living room for a quieter talk. "I've been thinking about visiting my late husband's grave," Grace began softly, sitting on the couch. "I feel like I owe him some kind of explanation. It sounds strange, I know, but a part of me still carries guilt. Maybe even a fear that I'm betraying his memory by letting Robert into our lives." Sarah's gaze held compassion. "It doesn't sound strange at all. Your husband was important to you. Visiting his grave might give you a chance to speak your heart, set down the guilt, and move forward." Grace exhaled, her eyes moistening. "I loved him dearly. But if I'd known the donor was Robert, or that our children would eventually meet their biological father like this, I can't help questioning every decision." Sarah squeezed Grace's hand. "Sweetheart, life rarely unfolds the way we plan. You did your best with the information you had. Now you have a new chance to build something beautiful for the twins. You deserve that." Grace nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She glanced toward the hallway where the kids chatted, their voices bright and hopeful. Yes, she thought, maybe they all deserved a chance at happiness. Before Sarah left, the older woman whispered, Take the time you need, but don't wait too long. Healing often requires action. That evening, when the children were preoccupied with homework, Grace summoned the courage to call Robert. He picked up almost immediately, his voice resonating warmth through the line. "Grace," he said gently, "is everything okay?" She cleared her throat, heart fluttering with emotion she couldn't quite name. "Yes, I just wanted to say thank you again for the fundraiser, for your support, for, well, everything, and I'd like to make a request." "Anything," he replied without hesitation. "I'd like to visit my late husband's grave this week. It's a few hours away. I want to bring the kids, but I'd also like you to come. I need to reconcile the past with the present, and somehow I think having you there might help." A moment of silence passed on the other end. She imagined the surprise and resolve on his face. At last, he spoke, voice steady. "I'd be honored to go with you if you're sure." She exhaled, relief flooding her. "I'm sure." They said their goodnights, and Grace lingered by the window, gazing at the glowing city lights. The path ahead still looked daunting, but for the first time she felt a sense of unity, as though the puzzle pieces of her past, her children's present, and Robert's place in their future might finally come together. Even as anxiety gnawed at her edges, a gentle whisper in her mind reminded her of Sarah's words. Healing often requires action. 3 days later, they set out early in the morning. Grace, Oliver, and Olivia piled into Robert's practical sedan, backpacks stuffed with snacks and water. The cemetery was located in a quiet town upstate, where Grace's late husband had grown up. During the drive, Robert kept the music low and conversation light, sensing the delicate emotions hovering over them all. Oliver gazed out the window, occasionally pointing at passing landmarks. Olivia hummed softly to herself, strumming imaginary chords on her thigh. Grace sat in the passenger seat, hands folded in her lap. She glanced at Robert now and then, managing faint, appreciative smiles. He returned them, a comforting presence in his steady gaze. It took nearly 2 hours to reach the cemetery, a tucked-away plot of land bordered by old oaks and a stone wall covered in ivy. The sky was overcast, lending a somber tranquility to the scene. Grace guided them to a modest headstone near the corner, carved with her husband's name. Overgrown grass hinted that it had been a while since her last visit. Oliver and Olivia hovered, clutching each other's hands, uncertain of the proper way to behave. Grace knelt before the grave, touching the stone with reverence. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Hi, Michael. It's been too long. I'm sorry." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Robert and the twins stepped back slightly, giving her a moment of privacy. In hushed tones, she shared updates, how the kids were growing, how she'd managed on her own for so long, how she hoped he'd understand her decision to let someone else into their lives. After a minute, she gestured for Oliver and Olivia to come closer. "Kids, this is your mom's first husband, the man I thought was your father. He loved me dearly, and he knew how much I wanted children. He passed away before I ever found out about Mr. Harrison's donation." She let out a shaky breath. "I think he would have wanted me to be happy, to make sure you both had everything you needed, including a father figure." Oliver nodded, a shadow of sympathy crossing his features. Olivia reached out to gently place a small, hand-drawn card at the base of the headstone, an image of a family beneath a rainbow. "We wanted to say thank you," Olivia said quietly. "Because if you hadn't been there for Mom, she might not be who she is today." Grace's throat constricted with emotion. She hugged both children tightly, whispering her gratitude for their tenderness. Then, almost uncertainly, she looked back at Robert, beckoning him to step closer. He did so, hands clasped respectfully in front of him. She spoke to the headstone in a trembling whisper. "Michael, this is Robert Harrison. I never expected him to be connected to our lives again, but he is. I hope you can forgive me for moving forward. I hope you see that he loves the kids and wants what's best for them." Another tear fell as she murmured, "Thank you for everything you gave me, especially the courage to become a mother." Robert stood with a bowed head, feeling the weight of grace and responsibility in that moment. He didn't speak, afraid of intruding on something sacred. But inside, he silently promised to honor the role that Michael had once filled, not by replacing him, but by standing alongside his memory and caring for the family he'd left behind. When the emotional storm subsided, Grace gently patted the headstone one last time, then rose. The four of them meandered through the resting place, speaking in hushed tones. A sense of calm, even release, permeated the air. While sadness lingered, it was tempered by relief. Grace had taken an essential step toward reconciling her past with her present. Before departing, Robert guided them to a small flower stand near the entrance. He purchased a simple bouquet of lilies, handing it to Grace. Wordlessly, she placed them at the grave, letting a soft breeze carry the delicate scent across the headstone. Standing there, they all felt an unspoken understanding. This was a moment of unity, bridging old losses and new beginnings. The drive home was quieter. Oliver and Olivia dozed in the back seat, emotionally spent from the experience. Grace stared out the window, eyes occasionally misty, yet her posture was more relaxed than before. Robert cast her a careful sidelong look, and she managed a small smile in return. The sorrow of the day seemed to have lifted a weight off her shoulders. When they finally reached the city, Grace asked him to drop them at her apartment. As he parked, she glanced at him thoughtfully. "Thank you, Robert, for coming with us, for everything." He pressed his lips together. "I'm grateful you let me be part of it." She opened the door, ushering the children out. Pausing, she glanced back at him. "Why don't you come up for a bit? We can talk about that budgeting plan, maybe order a pizza. The kids would like that." His heart soared at the invitation, a warmth suffusing him. "I'd love to," he said quietly, stepping out of the car. In the evening twilight, they ascended the worn steps to her apartment. It felt like crossing another threshold, one where shadows of the past no longer threatened their fragile future. Robert's impromptu visit stretched longer than a conversation about budgeting. After pizza and some laughter sparked by Oliver's and Olivia's animated retelling of a school talent show, Grace finally found a moment to spread out her overdue bills on the kitchen table. She explained her financial struggles, the looming rent hike, utility bills, and the children's school expenses. Though her voice shook with residual embarrassment, she pressed on, determined to do the best for her family. Robert listened intently, resisting any urge to offer a direct bailout. Instead, he helped Grace list her income and expenses in 2 neat columns on a notepad. He showed her how to categorize essential costs versus negotiable ones, how to track spending patterns, and where she might find room for small investments or savings. "You see," he explained, tapping a pen on the pad, "if you can set aside even a small emergency fund, you'll have a safety net. It's not about living lavishly. It's about having a buffer for the unexpected." Grace nodded, the knot in her stomach loosening. "It all makes sense in theory, but I've never had a consistent enough income to do much more than break even." "That's where my contacts can help," he replied thoughtfully. "There are community grants, scholarships, and specific tax credits you could qualify for as a single parent. If you'll let me, I can connect you with a financial counselor who understands these programs." She hesitated, old pride flaring, but Oliver's laughter wafted from the living room, reminding her that this wasn't just about her anymore. "All right," she said finally. "Let's try it. Thank you." He covered her hand gently with his, a tender moment interrupted only by Olivia peeking into the kitchen to announce she was out of guitar picks. They both laughed, and Robert handed her a spare pen as a playful substitute. With the serious talk done, Grace ushered everyone to the living room, where they ended up flipping through a family board game. It was a battered old set, missing a few pieces, but the kids didn't mind. Robert offered to be the banker, a role that made them all smirk, given his professional background. The next hour flew in a blur of dice rolls, cheerful banter, and gentle teasing. For the first time, Grace allowed herself to fully relish this feeling of togetherness, a near-forgotten dream now blossoming into reality. Near midnight, with Oliver and Olivia sound asleep on the couch, Grace and Robert carefully carried them to their shared bedroom. As she tucked them in, Grace sensed that intangible shift. Her children now saw Robert not merely as a kind benefactor or Mr. Harrison, but as someone who might truly be part of their daily lives. Returning to the living room, Grace found Robert at the window, gazing at the city lights beyond. She cleared her throat to announce her presence. He turned, hands stuffed into his pockets. A gentle tension hung in the air. "Thank you for everything tonight," she began softly, hugging her arms to her chest. "I feel like we're finally moving forward." He nodded, eyes shining with quiet emotion. "I do too. It's what I've wanted ever since I realized they were my kids." A fragile silence passed. Memories flickered through her mind. Their teenage romance, the painful years apart, her unexpected widowhood, and now this second chance at a family. She stepped closer. "I spent so long thinking I had to do everything alone," she confessed, voice trembling. "I had Oliver and Olivia, but no one else. I almost forgot what it felt like to share life with another person." He reached out, gently taking her hand. "You don't have to do it alone anymore, Grace." The hush deepened, filled only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant car horns outside. Emotions churned through her, relief, vulnerability, the stirrings of new affection. She remembered her vow to protect her heart and her children. But as she looked into Robert's eyes, the cautious walls around her began to crumble. Slowly, she allowed herself to lean into him, resting her head against his shoulder. He encircled her in a careful embrace, as though giving her space to pull back if she chose. She didn't. A tear slipped down her cheek, mirrored by the gentle thud of his heartbeat against her ear. They stayed like that for a moment, neither speaking, simply absorbing the warmth of the other. When they finally pulled apart, Grace managed a shaky smile. "One step at a time, right?" He returned the smile, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "One step at a time." That night, as he departed quietly, Grace's mind swirled with a mix of hope and apprehension. Their journey together was far from over. She sensed bigger challenges ahead, perhaps from the press or from unexpected corners of Robert's business life. But for now, she allowed herself to feel something she dared not feel in years, the promise of love, no longer overshadowed by guilt or fear. A few weeks later, a sense of normalcy had settled into Grace's household, but it was a new kind of normal, where Robert's presence became part of their rhythm. He often joined them for small weekend outings or impromptu weeknight dinners. Oliver and Olivia's laughter grew more uninhibited around him, slipping into the easy affection that only children can grant when they trust an adult. Despite this progress, a lingering tension hovered in the background. Robert's high-profile status meant the media's curiosity had been piqued by rumors of his mysterious family. Until now, he'd managed to keep most reporters at bay. But one late afternoon, as Grace and the kids left the community center, they found a photographer outside snapping pictures. Anxiety spiked in Grace's chest, though Robert had warned her this might happen someday. When Robert arrived that evening, having learned of the paparazzi incident, he found Grace on edge. She paced her living room, arms folded. Oliver and Olivia were huddled on the couch, uncertain what to make of the situation. "I'm so sorry," Robert began, shutting the front door behind him. "I knew the press might catch on eventually, but I tried to protect you." Grace let out a shaky breath. "I just worry about the kids. I don't want them hounded or harassed. They don't deserve to be pulled into some tabloid story." He nodded earnestly, kneeling down in front of Oliver and Olivia. "I promise we'll make sure you're safe. No one is going to hurt you. If the press keeps bothering us, I'll hire security or we'll figure out a plan, but you two shouldn't have to be afraid." Oliver studied him. "Will they say bad things about us?" Robert's heart clenched. "They might try, but it's all nonsense. What matters is what we know in here." He placed a hand gently over the boy's chest, near his heart. "We know we're a family." Olivia wrapped her arms around Robert, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "I don't want to be in the news. I just want to sing and play soccer and draw dinosaurs with Oliver." Grace stepped closer, emotion straining her voice. "We'll do our best to keep your privacy, okay? But if someone takes a picture or says something untrue, we'll handle it together. You're not alone." That reassurance seemed to settle the children's nerves. They retreated to their room, leaving Grace and Robert to face each other in the small living area. The faint hum of the fridge underscored the tension. "I can release a statement to the press if you're open to it," Robert offered. "Something official that confirms I'm stepping into a parental role and that we expect privacy. Sometimes that reduces speculation." Grace looked uneasy. "I hate the idea of going public with our personal lives, but maybe it's better than letting rumors swirl." He reached for her hand, gently stroking her knuckles. "Only if you feel comfortable, and we can keep it simple, no details, just a confirmation that we're working on building a family." She hesitated, then nodded. "If that's what it takes to protect the kids from further gossip, let's do it." The next day, Robert's PR team released a short, respectful statement asking for privacy. It confirmed that Robert was indeed a father who had only recently discovered his children and was now focused on their well-being. While a few tabloids tried to spin drama, the story soon lost its novelty. Grace felt a pulse of relief when the paparazzi gradually backed off. With that crisis managed, life settled again. Over time, Grace found her finances stabilizing, thanks to the budgeting strategies and resources Robert connected her with. The community center thrived after the successful fundraiser, and the children blossomed under the steady reassurance of having two adults who genuinely cared for them. Finally, one crisp morning, Robert invited Grace and the twins to his penthouse for the first time. They'd resisted the notion at first. Grace worried about the opulence, and the kids worried they'd break something expensive. But Robert insisted, wanting them to see every part of his life, not just the carefully curated slices he shared at Grace's place. When they arrived, Oliver and Olivia gawked at the floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed New York's skyline in a breathtaking sweep. Robert ushered them to a bright, open living area filled with contemporary artwork and plush seating. It contrasted sharply with Grace's cozy, worn furniture, but she noticed personal touches Robert had added. A framed sketch Oliver had made, displayed proudly on a side table, and a small stand for Olivia's guitar in a corner. They spent the afternoon cooking together. Robert had arranged for a relaxed, family-style meal. He guided the kids in preparing simple dishes, laughing at Oliver's comedic attempts to flip a pancake and Olivia's reluctant bravery when asked to chop vegetables. Grace relaxed enough to enjoy the ambiance, stepping aside to watch them. A swirl of emotion clogged her throat. Despite their differences in backgrounds and histories, they looked so at home together. Dinner ended with a clumsy but heartfelt toast. "To family," Robert said, raising a glass of sparkling cider. The twins and Grace raised theirs in unison. "To family," Grace echoed, voice thick. She locked eyes with Robert, a silent exchange of gratitude and acceptance. Later, as the sun set behind the towering skyscrapers, the four of them perched near the windows to witness the city lights flicker on. Oliver pressed his nose to the glass, marveling at the stars on the buildings. Olivia leaned her head on Grace's shoulder, guitar resting against her legs. Robert stood close, an arm gently draped around Grace's waist. In that hushed moment, Grace felt tears prick her eyes. She recalled how she once believed life had dealt her too many blows to ever recover fully. Yet here they were, together, forging a bond that proved healing was possible, even after years of pain and lost chances. The city glowed beneath them, a testament to resilience. "Mom," Oliver whispered, eyes still on the horizon, "it's so pretty." She nodded, a tear slipping free. "Yes, it is, and so are the things we can't see, like hope and love." Robert's arm tightened around her, and she leaned into him, letting go of past fears. Their family wasn't perfect, and challenges would inevitably arise, but the transformation that had begun was genuine, grounded in honesty, acceptance, and the quiet power of second chances. Oliver and Olivia nestled closer, lulled by the warm hush of the room and the soft, steady breaths of the adults. Grace closed her eyes, offering silent thanks to the memory of her late husband for loving her when he did, to Robert for returning at exactly the right time, and to the children for embracing change with their pure hearts. There, surrounded by shimmering lights and the low hum of a city that never slept, they found a new serenity, a final, tender recognition that they had indeed become a family. The tears that slipped down Grace's cheeks were no longer born of sorrow, but of gratitude so overwhelming it made her chest ache. In that timeless instant, she understood that sometimes the most unexpected gifts bring about the deepest joys, and that, ultimately, love has the power to reshape every broken corner of our lives. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.